News. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News with Dubes & Co from 6, followed by Farage at 7. At 8, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg addresses the state of the nation. And at 9, join Patrick Christie's Tonight, followed by Headliners at 11. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry and this is GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Ellie Costello and thank you so much for joining us here on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Thursday, the 9th of May.
Now, former Chancellor Nadim Zahawi becomes the latest senior Conservative MP to announce he will stand down at the general election, taking the Tory quitter count to 64. This on the day one poll puts Labour 30 points now ahead of the Conservatives.
And Rishi Sunak meets with university bosses to demand assurances for the safety of Jewish students. He's warned that protests are, in some cases, propagating outright harassment and anti-Semitic abuse. Is it time for a clampdown?
Anne, how often do you use the word plonker? It may be the favourite insult of the cast of Only Fools and Horses, but it's one of 15 British insults at risk of dying out, according to a new survey. Plonkers. Well, we've got a big question today. Will borrowing costs rise or fall in the next minute or so?
Yes, imminently, the Bank of England will announce its latest interest rate decision. Remember, crucially, the rate currently sits at 5.25% after being held now for 5 times in a row.
Well, let's cross straight to our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, who is fittingly right outside the Bank of England for us. Liam, 5 times in a row, held at 5.25%. What are we expecting?
What we're expecting, Emily, is I'm going to have to raise my voice because there's lots of pneumatic drills in the background, as there have been around the Bank of England for several months now. We are expecting rates to be kept on hold. That won't please mortgage borrowers, it won't please GB News viewers and listeners with personal debts, and it won't please businesses that have also got borrowings on their balance sheet. But it will suit lots of older GB News viewers and listeners, pensioners who live on fixed incomes and so on. But look, the Bank of England has kept interest rates at 5.25% since last August. The reason is that inflation remains above target. The latest inflation number is 3.2%. That's the annual inflation during the year to March. And of course, the Bank of England's target is 2%. We won't have the April inflation number until about a fortnight's time, I think in the 3rd week of May. But for now, inflation remains above target. That's the main reason why I'm expecting the Bank of England any second now to announce that they're keeping interest rates on hold. But I still haven't got the news. Maybe you'll find out before me.
We are still waiting on that decision, Liam. I'm being told I'll be told in my ear as soon as it happens. But what are the implications for it being held, if indeed that is what happens?
Well, the implications are that certainly that if you are trying to remortgage your house, then
Liam, I'm going to interrupt you because they have now.
They have indeed been held.
Yeah.
They have indeed been held at 5.25%. If we can go to the graphic, you can see there that they first reached 5.25% back in August 2023. So this is the 6th hold in a row. The Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee, the 9 economists who decide interest rates, they don't meet every month, they meet 8 months a year. The fact that they have been held, it is disappointing for lots of people who want to remortgage their house. They want to see mortgage rates come down. It's also disappointing, of course, for someone called Rishi Sunak, who is betting, he's bet the ranch, bet the Tories' entire strategy for this election, to the extent they have a strategy on playing the long game, on waiting for interest rate cuts, on getting more tax cuts in. We've had 2 so far, those national insurance reductions. Tory High Command wants to get another one in before the general election. So I don't think there'll be disappointment in Downing Street, because they knew this was coming. They knew there wasn't being an interest rate cut today. Now, when I take my eyes away from the camera and manage to read, or maybe you guys can read, if we look at the Bank of England minutes of that meeting, there will be hints there, and I suspect the minutes will point to interest rate cuts relatively soon. So the government is likely to cling on to those comments and say, you see, the economy is getting better if you've got borrowings, if you're a hard-pressed family with mortgages. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves, of course, will then say she's already done a sort of a rebuttal that happens before the event. She'll say that ministers are gaslighting the British public on the economy, because if anyone thinks that the economy is getting better, they must be woefully out of touch, wealthy Tories who don't understand the country.
Liam, I'm just reading here that the Monetary Committee, the Monetary Policy Committee, voted by a majority of 7-2 to maintain that bank rate at 5.25%. So quite overwhelming majority there.
It is overwhelming, Emily, and why is it overwhelming? Because we've seen inflation in the last month or so actually go up in the United States, and the Federal Reserve is very important to the Bank of England behind me. It tends to stay pretty much in lockstep with the Federal Reserve, maybe cutting interest rates a bit sooner, maybe cutting interest rates a bit later, but pretty much always in the same direction. So there are fears that inflation could spike. I think the next inflation number, when it comes out later this month, ironically, will be a lot lower than 3.2%, where it currently is. It'll be near the 2% target. It may even go below the 2% target, because this time last year there were changes to energy prices. We've had the reduction in the Ofgem energy price cap that tends to regulate household utility bills. But the general mood on global financial markets is that commodity prices based on geopolitical risk are going up. The OPEC energy exporters cartel is keeping oil prices firm, working hand in glove now with non-OPEC member Russia to limit oil supplies to global markets and keep prices high. Even though the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee, the 9 economist rate setters, nothing they do impacts global oil markets, of course, but if global oil markets are punchy, petrol prices are going up, diesel prices are going up, transport costs are going up, that pushes up food costs. There's a lot of oil and gas and energy involved in food production, and inflation in the UK starts going up again this summer. Don't shoot the messenger. It could happen. It will be very, very difficult for the Bank of England to do multiple interest rate cuts, because inflation, the Chancellor said it before, and I have to agree with him on this, doesn't generally fall in a straight line. I do think interest rates will be lower than where they currently are by the end of the year, but we may just see 1, maximum 2 cuts before the general election, not the 3 or 4 that Rishi Sunak and his strategists were hoping for.
And Liam, it's worth saying those 2 dissenters of the 9 MPC members, they did vote for a cut. I think I'm right in saying that the last time this happened, there were also 2 who voted for a cut. It's worth saying that UK inflation is now lower than US inflation. Inflation went down by more than was expected in the last announcement. Are we relying too much on the US, or is this simply out of the control of people on our island?
You'll know, Tom, because I know you follow these economic issues very closely. Both of you do. We often talk about economics on your show, don't we? But you'll know that I've been saying for months and months and months that interest rates should be cut. We've already seen the Swiss cut interest rates ahead of the Americans. This morning we saw the Swedish central bank cut interest rates before the Americans. It's almost as if the Monetary Policy Committee is too timid to do anything until it gets permission from our American cousins. I say that partly in jest, but only partly, because I do think the Bank of England needs more cognitive diversity. I do think they need more people out on the committee who haven't just been appointed by the Treasury, because the Treasury knows that there'll be well-behaved economists spouting conventional wisdoms, rather than being people of serious intellect, of serious grit, who can actually argue the other case. People who should have been arguing on the MPC throughout 2020 and 2021 that the notion that inflation coming out of lockdown would be transitory was complete nonsense. A lot of us said it at the time, but it's what the Americans were saying, so we felt we had to say it too. We have many very, very talented economists in this country. We need more diversity of opinion on the MPC, real diversity, cognitive diversity, the sort of diversity that when it comes to policy making really counts.
Yes, Rachel Reeves didn't seem too interested in that, did she? She didn't appear to see there as being a problem. Can I ask you about something else that's just being in the press, reported in the press today, Liam, while we've got you, economics related, of course. Now, the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, I don't know if you know much about them as an organisation, but they're saying whatever government we have at the next general election, taxes will have to rise. Income tax would have to rise by potentially up to 3% just to fund our public services, and because we've got so much debt. I mean, what would your response be to that sort of idea?
Well, a lot of GB News viewers and listeners will have heard of the IFS, the Institute for Fiscal Studies. They tend to opine on tax issues and, if you like, kind of microeconomic issues, budgetary issues. The National Institute for Economic and Social Research, which is probably the most respected economic think tank in Britain, arguably in Europe. It's been around for many, many, many years. The head of the National Institute is a very independent economist called Jajit Chadha, who is increasingly carving out a reputation as somebody who's prepared to at least question conventional wisdoms. And the National Institute are weighing in, and they are a deeply apolitical organisation. I've been talking to them basically since I was an A-level student. I know the Institute very, very well. For them to say that any party that comes in is going to have to raise taxes, they're not doing that from a kind of ideological point of view. They're not saying that because, you know, they want higher taxes. They're saying that because that's what they see as an economic inevitability, given the fact that growth has been so slow. If the economy doesn't expand, politics gets really nasty and venal, because the cake doesn't get bigger, and when the population's going up at the rate ours is, the cake per head, the slice each individual person gets, actually gets smaller. And that's what we've seen in the UK over the last 2 years. GDP per capita, as we say, the economy, the size of the economy per head has been shrinking. And that's why the public finances are under pressure. That's why there's no sign of a feel-good factor. That's why, the main reason, I would say, why the Tories are in a hole.
Really interesting stuff there, Liam Halligan. Thank you very much for joining us live outside a very sunny Bank of England today. Very jealous. It seems to be the best place to be broadcasting from, and we couldn't hear that many building works.
No, it actually sounded all right, didn't it? Interesting that he says this institute that's come out to say that tax rises may well be inevitable. He says, Liam says they're apolitical. It's not like they're a socialist organisation that want us all to have higher taxes for ideological reasons. They're just saying, you know, with the rate of debt and our public services and no growth.
And all the promises that these politicians keep making of spending money here and spending money there. Taxes wouldn't have to go up if politicians were courageous about finding some savings, but it seems that they're really, really not.
And interest rates aren't going down, and of course this will have a big impact on housing. High interest rates taking their toll on mortgage owners, potential buyers across the country.
Well, Ray Bulger is the Senior Mortgage Manager at John Charcoal and joins us now. Ray, frankly, there'll be a lot of disappointed people today, hoping for lower rates, because higher rates do tend to gum up the housing market.
Yes, well, although, as you say, people will be disappointed, there was no real expectation we would see a cut in bank rate today. And it is encouraging that the two dissenting members of the Monetary Policy Committee at least voted for a reduction. As Liam said, the fact that the Fed looks like being further away from cutting rates is unhelpful. But perhaps what's more relevant is that the European Central Bank is expected to cut rates at its next meeting. And our economy, of course, is closer linked to the EU economy than the US economy. So I suspect at the next MPC meeting, we will see a much closer vote. And whereas this time round, no change was expected, I think next time round it'll be much more difficult to forecast.
And Ray, how is this impacting people looking to move or buy their first property? Do you imagine that people will put it off a little longer, hoping that at some point, perhaps during the summer or early autumn, those rates will come down?
Well, I think there's no doubt some people have been putting it off in the hope of rates coming down. But I think if it's right for you to move or right for you to buy your first property, actually, that's more important than worrying about the last 0.5% in interest rates, assuming, of course, you can afford mortgage payments. The expectation is that we will see rates come down over the next 2 or 3 years. And if you buy your house at the right time, or your flat, whatever it is, then whatever your first mortgage deal is, you're going to change it probably in a few years' time anyway. But there is no doubt that anybody looking to move, because in many cases they will be paying a really low rate of interest, in some cases as low as 1%. If they're looking to move, increase their mortgage, they've got the double whammy of a higher interest rate and a bigger mortgage. So that's clearly holding back people looking to move.
Yes, and that does mean that we have seen a little bit of a dip in house prices, although they are expected to return to growth next year. I suppose that is intrinsically linked with interest rates and mortgage rates.
Well, they certainly are, yes. I mean, house prices actually have done very little over the last few months. If you look at the nationwide index, if you look at the real prices rather than the seasonally adjusted ones they tend to announce, they've actually increased slightly in the last few months, but basically the market's pretty flat. There was a report out today from RICS saying that there are more properties coming on the market. So that will be helpful for people looking to buy. They'll have more choice. And I think all the indications are that prices are not really going to move very much over the next few months.
Yes, it'll be very interesting to see. I mean, the issue with supply is just there, isn't it, really, which is keeping those prices high, regardless of the interest rate question. But how is the market doing generally? Do you expect that if interest rates were to fall, and hopefully they will at some point, that people would start moving, buying, prices would rocket again?
Well, I don't see prices rocketing. And although obviously the supply and demand is always going to be a factor, if you take a long-term view, by far and away the biggest single factor influencing house prices is interest rates, because it's all down to affordability. So as we see interest rates fall over the next couple of years, assuming that's what's happened, what happens, yes, that will be positive for house prices. But of course, there's some catching up to do, because with the level of inflation we've had, we're now in a situation where, in general, salary rises are slightly higher than inflation, but it takes quite a while before people adjust. So people have not only got to look at higher mortgage rates, they've also got to look at higher costs of living generally. One thing which I think is well worth mentioning is that for first-time buyers, there is perhaps more choice and better options now than there has been for some time. There's a perception, if you're a first-time buyer or a renter generally, that it's really difficult to move without any deposit. And it's certainly true to say that the bigger the deposit you've got, the better the mortgage deals available. But there is, for example, one mortgage on the market from Skipton called the track record mortgage, which is based on your rental ability. And that's priced at 5.55% for a 5-year fix for a 100% mortgage. Now, that's only about 1% dearer than the best 5-year fixes for people with a big deposit. So there will, I think, be some people watching this who are thinking, I've got no chance of getting a mortgage. And it may well be they do. So I would recommend anybody who's thinking about it.
Actually dig into it and you might actually find something. Thank you so much, Ray Bolger, Senior Mortgage Manager at John Charcoal. Really great to get your expertise on a day like today, although those interest rates have, of course, held. So, there is always some people who think, oh, maybe they might fall. maybe they might fall, but
also
sadly not.
There are people who have savings who quite like higher rates as well. So it's not always a very clear-cut thing, although I think in general, at the moment, most people would probably like a little bit more economic growth, which tends to be associated with lower rates.
Yes, it might leave a bit more cash in people's pockets if they do eventually come down. But there you go, Liam Halligan will keep us updated on any movements. Keep your views coming in. Lots of you getting in touch about that point about potential tax rises. I mean, 3%, another 3% on income tax? Not what you want, is it?
It's worth saying there's a bit of sting in the analysis that the Bank of England has published alongside this decision. They've projected what inflation is expected to do, and they're saying this quarter, the second quarter of this year, it's going to fall down to the 2% target. We're going to finally meet that 2% target after years and years and years this quarter. But then the following quarter, it's going to go back up again. They're saying that all of the worry around fuel, oil, gas prices, that's going to send it back up to 2.5%. So it might be that by the time we go into an election, inflation's actually ticking back up, albeit to a reasonable level. 2.5% I don't think is disastrous for anyone.
There's a bit of a row going on gbnews.com/your say over whether it's a good thing that these rates have been held. Greg says cut rates to stimulate growth. Simple, really. Jane says that's what I thought, but wrong apparently. And Gary says not really. Cut rates, pound falls against the dollar, oil fuel prices then increase, then the cost of virtually everything rises, then you have to raise rates. Just leave them at normal where they are at the moment and leave them alone for years. Well, yes, people do point that out, that these are historical norms. We just had very, very, very low interest rates for a while.
No, and Gary has written another comment saying, stop saying rates are high, rates are normal. And if we take a view not just of the last decade, but of the last 30 years, of course rates are normal. 5.25% is, I mean, we say it's the highest it's been in 16 years. Yes, but what was it 16 years ago? For a protracted period of time, up until the financial crisis, we had rates between 4 and 5 and 6%.
Problem is, though, the reality is we're all leveraged so much. I mean, people taking out an average mortgage for 35 odd years now, with wages not growing very quickly. So, yes, we're all at a bit of risk.
Absolutely.
If interest rates go high.
Borrowing £100,000 at a 5% interest rate, that's one thing. Borrowing £400,000 at a 5% interest rate, that's a very, very different kettle of fish, especially when you thought you'd be borrowing it at a 1% rate.
There you go. Let us know your reaction to this all. Are you surprised by the Bank of England holding the rate again? Would you accept higher tax rises for public services? We've got ourselves into a bit of a pickle with all the debt that we've accrued. But coming up, the former Chancellor, Nadim Zahawi, becomes the latest senior Conservative MP to announce he's standing down at the general election. That takes the Tory quitter count to 64.
Well, more on that very shortly. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
Dubes & Co. Weekdays from 6 p.m.
Organisations, plural, because there's loads of people doing this, that organisations are charging schools to be part of this odd league table about who's trying to outdo who when it comes to who is more trans-inclusive with the kids than the next person. There's something makes me uneasy about this.
Supposing a child comes home and says, you think, oh, I've done well today. He said, well, how have you done? He said, well, I was #1 painter, or I was #1 reader. No, I wasn't. I was made LGBT champion. This is a 4- and 5-year-old. Look, I can understand this, actually, as we develop into the secondary school. I can understand more debates taking place. I cannot understand why we have to thrust it at young children. And I think if you ask the parents, they'd be hostile to it. And what about the role the teacher has to play in all this?
Society has been one way, the pendulum is swinging the other way, and they're pushing it very far in order to kind of proliferate change. And this is probably the toughest period in that evolutionary process, because the LGBTQ+ community is saying that you've got to really rage against the machine to get people to listen. Because put it like this now, even this conversation, the whole country is listening, the whole world is listening. These are the kinds of eyeballs and ears they haven't had before. And there's going to be friction. There's going to be a locking of heads in the process to getting to a point where you establish a new equilibrium where they feel more incorporated. Like I've said, the greatest force of allies that the LGBTQ+ community has always had is heterosexual women. What you're moving towards now is doing things that is beginning to turn them from allies into people who feel that, oh, for you to thrive, I'm being deprived, and that's a problem. When they realise you're alienating allies, they will understand you've got to recalibrate to have that kind of understanding between both parties.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there. This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News with Dubes & Co from 6, followed by Farage at 7. At 8, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg addresses the state of the nation. And at 9, join Patrick Christie's Tonight, followed by Headliners at 11. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 21 minutes past 12. Now, former Chancellor Nadhim Zahawi will not stand at the next general election.
Yes, the MP for Stratford-on-Avon is now the 64th Tory to announce he will not be running. Look at that screen. Those are the 64.
Conservatives.
Nadhim Zahawi there at the bottom. Dishon, Greg Whitaker, Jamie Wallace, Kwasi Kwarteng, Brandon Lewis, Theresa May, of course, James
Grayling, Robert Halfon, Richard Bacon, Lucy Allen, Nikki Aitken, Adam Afriyie, Graham Brady, George Eustace, Mike Freer, lots and lots of names that will be familiar to many watching. Brandon Lewis there as well.
Interesting to know what you make of this. 64 Conservative MPs deciding, you know what? Don't fancy running again. I'll stand down before the general election. Is it because they suspect that perhaps they may not win their seat? Or do you take a generous view that perhaps, you know, they've done some good work and they're on to the next thing?
Well, people like Theresa May and Sir Graham Brady have been there since the 1990s. They've done the long stint and they might think, you know, I've reached the end of my career. But there are some people here in their 30s. There's one in her 20s, I believe.
Had enough. Had enough. Well, joining us is GB News political correspondent Olivia Utley. Olivia, just looking at that graphic there, 64.
64 MPs standing down, Conservative MPs standing down before the next general election. To put that in perspective, in 1997, before the Blair landslide, just 75 Conservative MPs had stood down. So we're very, very nearly there, and we're already at a bigger percentage of the parliamentary party than back in 1997. The loss of Nadhim Zahawi is actually quite a blow for the Prime Minister. Obviously, he had to step down under a bit of a shadow when it emerged that he'd covered up HMRC investigating his tax affairs, but he is a very popular MP within the party. His backstory is incredible. A boy from Baghdad who came here speaking no English at all, set up YouGov, obviously a very successful business, although perhaps not particularly popular with Conservative MPs at the moment, and then on to be Chancellor of the Exchequer, Education Secretary. He says he wants to see in his resignation letter, he wants to see someone with energy and vigour standing for the historic seat of Stratford-on-Avon. It's hard to imagine who would want the job. There are Conservative candidates. There is a waiting list of Conservative candidates. But, God, it's going to be hard to get them standing. Nadhim Zahawi, like so many of these MPs who are standing down, has a big majority. He got 60% of the vote in 2019. But having a big majority these days just doesn't mean very much. We have seen swings bigger than that already in by-elections away from the Conservative Party and towards Labour. And I expect that there are some MPs who are thinking, well, even if I cling on to my seat, do I want to be sitting in Parliament for 5 years as part of a really weakened, small opposition?
Yes, it's a real big question, a conundrum for Conservatives, many of whom, because there was such a clear-out in 2010 with the expenses scandal, many MPs on all sides of the House stood down. You've got a huge number of new MPs in 2010. And then, of course, we had some big changes over Brexit, people leaving in 2019, new ones coming in.
David Cameron abandoning his job.
Quite a fresh House of Commons. You'll be hard-pressed to find many Conservatives who've been there, well, throughout the long, hard years from 1997.
Do you think they're fair weather Tories?
I wonder if many are wondering, Olivia, what's opposition about? I mean, most of these people have never had to endure it.
Well, absolutely. I think I'm right in saying there's literally only a handful of Conservative MPs who are still there from the 90s. Even someone like Theresa May, I think she was elected in, was it 2001? It does feel as though quite a lot of these MPs, they've never seen opposition before, and they probably don't really like the look of it. The fact that so many Conservative MPs are standing down suggests that they at least think that we could be heading for the sort of landslide seen in 1997. Being part of a strong opposition, perhaps up against in a hung parliament with Labour as the largest party, is one thing. Journalists like us are interested in what you have to say. You are providing some robust opposition to the government, and you might even be able to stop flagship important government legislation going through. Being part of a really small minority opposition of sort of 100 MPs, which some people are suggesting might be the case for the Conservatives this time round, is a completely different kettle of fish and will be really, really tough for MPs who, as you say, Tom, most of whom have only known life as an MP for the governing party.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Olivia Utley, GB News political correspondent, live there from Westminster. Should we get a little more political analysis from Peter Spencer, who is a political commentator? Peter, thank you so much. I mean, it must be pretty depressing for Rishi Sunak with all of his colleagues deciding that they're going to stand down. They must believe they don't stand a chance, really, of governing.
I have a mental picture of Rishi Sunak this time next year, enjoying the view from his palace in Silicon Valley, thinking, why did I even try? Because of the fact, as you rightly say, he is watching his party implode in front of his face. And Nadeem Zadabi, in his, I think, rather charming and very dignified resignation letter, cited Romeo and Juliet parting such sweet sorrow, but his real parting shot, I have to say, is today's poll from the company that he himself founded, YouGov, which gave Labour its biggest ever lead, 30 points. It also...
You don't think he timed that, do you, Peter? You don't think he's, I don't know, malicious in announcing this today with that YouGov poll out?
Actually, I doubt that, because of the fact he would have thought about this quite long and hard, and I would suspect that the figures from you...
And the day after Natalie Elphicke crosses the floor. I mean, bit of a brutal day for the leadership.
Oh, totally. I mean, Natalie Elphicke having second in a fortnight or whatever it is. I mean, to use Lady Bracknell here, to lose one MP looks like misfortune. To lose two looks like carelessness. And who knows how many more are going to follow. But to go back to Zahawi himself, I mean, he has had a pretty starry role in Parliament. He's served in so many of the great offices. And I suspect his real motivation is, look, we're going to get utterly slaughtered in the general election. Do I really want to be languishing on the opposition benches? And I've known plenty of MPs in my time who have found themselves, particularly Tory MPs after the Blair landslide, who were in a state of clinical depression and remained in that for a considerable length of time.
It's worth saying, Peter, that were we to believe this 30-point Labour lead in the latest YouGov poll, some people have projected that sort of uniformly across the 650 constituencies. Of course, it wouldn't properly work like that. There's always tactical voting and local differences and all the rest. But just doing the little exercise of projecting it uniformly across the UK, you end up with the Tories losing all but 13 of their seats. All but 13. It's the most extraordinary situation.
Well, yes. I mean, it's funny you should mention that. I mean, actually, it's been on the cards for years and years for the Palace of Westminster to get rebuilt so it doesn't catch fire because of all its out-of-date wiring. It would seem quite a good moment to actually redesign the Commons chamber, would it not? Because it would be so ridiculously imbalanced.
Redesign Winston Churchill's Commons chamber? That sounds a little uprooting of history.
Well, I couldn't agree more. But at the same time, there is quite a palpable danger that the place will catch fire because there is so much dodgy wiring around, and they have been talking about this for years and years and years, and they know something needs to be done. I mean, it's put together by Prince Albert, for heaven's sake. So, but I mean, yeah, joking aside about Winston Churchill and the side, that one of the things that I think particularly gives the Tories good reason to be troubled is not just the swing apparently to Labour, but also the swing in the direction of reform. 1 in 4, it's suggested, in fact, 2019 Tory voters have now switched to reform. Now, because of our voting system, first past the post, the likelihood of any reform MPs actually getting elected is very slim. But at the same time, in each of these constituencies where Reform are putting up a serious punt, what you're going to see there is a door wide open for yet more Labour MPs.
Yes. Well, thank you very much indeed, Peter Spencer, political commentator. Always great to speak to you. I think, Tom, you can't really extrapolate, can you? It's a bit of a nonsense. And also, when it comes down to it, on the day of the general election, people will view this as a choice between Keir Starmer or Rishi Sunak, or at least a lot of people will. Yes. And that might change. You know, it's easy to say that you're going to vote for one party in a survey like that, particularly when the governing party is seen to be failing on many fronts.
But Emily,
then general elections, you know.
At a time when Sir Keir Starmer is positioning himself to take the votes of everyone from John McDonnell to Natalie Elphicke, I mean, you can't really... There's no room left on the political spectrum in the United Kingdom. The Labour Party will be so broad-tent. I mean, obviously it won't stand for anything at all, and that might put off some people, but generally... I find it quite hard to see if that is genuinely the spread of ideological opinion now within the Labour Party. Many voters will be saying, I can see myself somewhere upon that spectrum.
And this is the problem. This is the problem. Yes, it may be useful for Keir Starmer, for his own plight, to try and not to say too much and to invite everyone into Team Labour, but we don't know what exactly he stands for. I mean, what do you make of that polling? Let us know. gbnews.com/your say. The Conservatives 30 points behind Labour now. Wow.
Goodness me. It's a bit like in the American South, where the Democrat Party in the United States, sort of in the 1950s, you used to have the Liberal Democrats and the Conservative Democrats. And it's almost like it was two completely different parties. And you might start to see that within the Labour Party over here. Or perhaps not. But much more to come. Rishi Sunak meeting with university bosses, of course, today. Is the safety of Jewish students at risk? Well, we'll get to that after your latest headlines.
Tom, thank you and good afternoon. The top stories. The Bank of England's base interest rate is unchanged for a sixth time, held at 5.25%. Economists had expected the bank to hold its rate, with inflation remaining at 3.2%, which is above the 2% target. The bank's governor, Andrew Bailey, struck an optimistic tone, saying progress was being made and its target would be met within a couple of months. Commuters are facing a third consecutive day of disruption as the rail industry's longest ever strike action continues. Members of ASLEF at LNER, TransPennine Express and Northern Trains are walking out today. The union claims its members haven't had a pay rise in 5 years and is accusing the government of giving up trying to resolve the issue. But the government says drivers have been offered salaries of up to £65,000, almost twice the UK average. The Home Office has removed figures on French efforts to stop small boat launches from its website. The clear U-turn comes a little more than a week after it first started publishing the data in an effort to show cooperation between French and UK authorities. The most recent figures had shown that French authorities stopped more than 1,000 migrants from launching boats since last week. An 18-month-old girl has had her hearing restored after she became the first person in the world to take part in a new gene therapy trial. Opal Sandy was born deaf due to auditory neuropathy, which disrupts nerve impulses from the inner ear to the brain. Now, thanks to an innovative new treatment being trialled here, Opal's hearing is almost normal and could even improve further. Her parents say they are delighted. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
The latest GB News travel. On the northbound side of the M1, a lane closure and queue in traffic to an accident just before 29 for Chesterfield and Mansfield. Delays to the tip shelf services. An advanced warning for the M25. Delays are to be expected. There's a full closure from 9 p.m. on Friday until the early hours of Monday morning, whilst roadworks take place from 9 at Leatherhead through to 10 for the Wisley interchange. The Dartford Tunnel anti-clockwise on the M25, seeing long delays to an earlier broken down lorry at 1A for Dartford, delays to the Swanley interchange at junction 3. Eastbound on the M4, a lane closure to a broken down vehicle between 12 Thiel through to Reading at junction 11. And the southbound side of the M5, there's a lane closure on the exit slip road to Weston-super-Mare, but traffic is coping well. So that's your latest. You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg's State of the Nation, Monday to Thursday from 8 p.m.
The International Monetary Fund has estimated that Russia will outgrow all advanced economies in 2024. This is in spite of all the sanctions the West has imposed on Russia, in spite of its removal of the SWIFT banking system, in spite of the fact that Germany has almost entirely weaned itself off Russian gas, and in spite of the 50,000 soldiers who have died and the endless resources it has poured into the Ukraine war. So, what are we missing here? Why is Russia going to grow more than the rest of us? Well, it's simple. Russia is willing to make use of its own energy resources to provide abundant supply to its citizens. Increased supply means lower prices, and cheap energy is inextricably linked to economic growth. But since 2008, the United States has grown at twice the rate of the United Kingdom. The big difference is that America has much lower energy prices, while the UK insists on masochistic green policies. But it's no surprise that the Green fanatics in the Scottish government, where they know how to be fanatics, have had to backtrack on their flagship greenhouse gas reduction target. The SNP has committed to reducing Scotland's CO2 emissions by 75% by 2030. Now, the Climate Change Committee has reviewed its policy and advised that the absurd reduction target is out of reach.
Can we accept the CCC's recent re-articulation that this Parliament's interim 2030 target is out of reach? We must now act to chart a course to 2045.
It is time to recognise the truth that net zero by 2050 is unrealistic and unaffordable. It's time we rid ourselves of this foolish and costly idea that will simply make people cold and poor. We need to prioritise cheap energy for Britain's consumers and for companies, for industry, enabling economic growth that will benefit us all.
It's 12:38. Now, in a few minutes, we're going to be talking about what's going on at our universities, particularly our campuses across the United Kingdom, really. Rishi Sunak's been meeting with the university bosses today to essentially tell them to take anti-Semitism a tad more seriously. We're going to talk about whether we should actually clamp down harder on these university protests, or would that be wrong? Would that be wrong for freedom of speech? Very important principle, freedom of protest. But we've seen what's happened in the United States. We saw how those escalated. We saw the harassment of Jewish students. Do we want the same thing happening here? We'll have that debate very shortly indeed.
Yes, my right to extend my fist stops just a couple of inches before your face begins.
Right, well, yes.
Yes.
I mean, there's so many Jewish students have come out. Did you see the shocking news that the National Union of Students voted out of their union, the Jewish Union of Students, which is quite an extraordinary thing to happen. They say it's because they supported Israel.
It's extraordinary, but it does not surprise me. once upon a time was elected to the National Union of Students. I went to multiple conferences.
Pinnacle of his career, height of his career.
The height of I went there for one purpose, which was to ruthlessly take the mick out of people who saw themselves not as representatives of students, but as some sort of legislative chamber that was more interested in international affairs than, you know, employability. Or,
oh, come on, Tom.
exams.
I imagine you used it as a, you know, a platform to pontificate about world affairs.
What I actually did
about
was...
the wonders of free market economics.
What I actually did was show them up by doing precisely that. My election was all about defeating ISIS. It was about agricultural reform, building a Death Star. I think, yeah, no, keep...
OK, well, enough of your illustrious career. Let's speak to the Director of Investigations and Enforcement at the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, Stephen Silverman. Stephen, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, he's had this meeting with the university bosses, the vice-chancellors. I don't know exactly how many of them he met. What's your understanding of what happened at that meeting? And are you hearing that things are moving in a positive direction?
Well, we've heard nothing from that meeting. I don't know what was said. We are not moving in a positive direction, and it is probably going to take far more dramatic action than those who attended the meeting want to carry out in order to reverse what is I was going to say a very frightening situation, but the reality of it is we are now seeing things that evoke what happened in the early years of the Nazi regime to Jews in Germany.
What sort of things, Stephen?
Well, Jews being refused admission to parts of their university, a Jewish chaplain at Leeds having to go into hiding because of death threats to him and rape threats to his wife. It is just horrendous. And the fact that the National Union of Students, who were the subject of an absolutely damning report by the distinguished KC Rebecca Tuck last year because it is so riven with anti-Semitism, could actually hold this vote, albeit non-binding, that called for the expulsion of the Union of Jewish Students, which means that Jewish students do not have a voice at the NUS, it's just mind-blowing that this could actually happen. We are in a very, very dangerous place right now.
I mean, when you put it like that and highlighting those circumstances, it does look absolutely terrifying. It's as if some of these students don't have any grasp of history.
They don't. And you see that time and time again. They self-certify themselves as being free of anti-Semitism by dictating to Jews about Jewish identity. The number of times we hear Zionism has nothing to do with being Jewish. Well, I'm sorry, they are wrong. They know nothing about the history of the Jewish people. They know nothing about Jewish identity. They also know nothing about the history of the region that they're protesting about. They've just been radicalized by propaganda on social media, by the reporting, the woeful reporting by some of our media outlets. And this is the cause that they have espoused in order to make them feel good about themselves. And the effect on Jewish students, as far as they are concerned, is irrelevant, because they have decided that they are the good guys. And if you have Israel as part of your identity, which the majority of Jewish students will do, they are the bad guys and are worthy of hatred. This has to stop. It runs counter to every decent British liberal democratic value.
Stephen, it totally runs counter to all of those values, but it also runs deep and keeps rearing its head. A decade ago, when I was at university, the president of the NUS was a woman by the name of Malia Bouattia. She described the University of Birmingham as a Zionist outpost because it had a large Jewish society. This stuff keeps coming back and coming back and coming back.
Yeah, I mean, this is why anti-Semitism is often referred to as a virus, because once it infects society, it runs rampant throughout it. And then just as society believes it has found a way to vaccinate itself against it, it mutates. And what we're seeing now is the most recent mutation of that virus. People hide themselves, shield themselves with the word Zionism when it's blatantly obvious they're talking about Jews.
It's true, and people don't seem to care when Jewish students say, we're feeling intimidated. I am genuinely fearful of revealing even the fact that I am Jewish. I mean, I've heard stories in particular from Nottingham University about Jewish students essentially being asked to expose themselves as to whether they're supportive of Israel as an entity, as a nation state. I mean, it's quite ridiculous. Just lastly, do you think it's time to clamp down on these protests, or do you believe that would be an affront to freedom of speech, freedom of expression, protest, etc.?
Look, absolutely not. Free speech is of paramount importance. And that while universities should uphold that right, it has to be exercised in a respectful and lawful manner, and without trampling all over the rights of other minorities. And when you have people such as Oxford, at the Oxford protest camp, participants have been asked to agree that Palestinians have the right to resist against occupation. In other words, October the 7th, which was the largest slaughter of Jews on one day since the Holocaust, that October the 7th was legitimate. It is literally endorsing the actions of a prescribed terrorist organization. This is nothing to do with freedom of expression and everything to do with hatred of Israel and hatred of the Jewish people.
It is clearly something that is bubbling over with hatred. One of the things that I think is the most revealing about some of that footage we could see from Oxford was how many people were covering their faces with masks. Are they ashamed of what they're saying? Or why are they trying to hide from their university? Why are they trying to hide from everyone else there? What's going on with covering the face with COVID masks? They might all be sick in what they're saying, but they're certainly not all sick with COVID. Very, very curious.
Well, if the cause that you're espousing requires you to cover your face, you might want to consider if you're espousing the right cause.
Well, yes. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Stephen Silverman, thank you very much for talking to us. Coming up, Pratt, Plonker, Numpty.
Are those all of the words that you're describing those protesters with?
No. Just you, Tom. No, not at all, not at all. Is your favourite insult dying out? Find out shortly.
Hello, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Not often we've been able to have a headline like this through the spring. It's been fine for a day or so in the south, but now most places joining in thanks to this area of high pressure. Not fine everywhere. There's always one or two exceptions. This weather front is bringing a little more cloud across the far northwest of Scotland through the Western Isles and some patchy rain here. A bit more cloud too over northeastern Scotland and northeast England, staying fairly grey in some places here. But for most, it's dry, fine. Plenty of spring sunshine coming through, lifting those temperatures quite nicely. The coast's a little cooler, particularly where it's a little bit misty, but in the sunny spells, 22, maybe 23 degrees Celsius. That cloud thickening up across northern Scotland, Caithness, Sutherland, and then the Northern Isles, seeing a bit of rain through the evening and overnight, but for most it'll stay dry. We'll see a bit more cloud and mist returning to parts of eastern England. Some fog patches possible across parts of southern England and South Wales as well. Temperatures in rural spots dipping to single figures, but most towns and cities staying in double digits, and most will have a cracking day tomorrow. Yes, could start a little misty, some fog patches, but they should clear fairly sharply. Some patchy rain across Shetland, but even that's on its way out by lunchtime. Some of the coasts, again, a little bit misty at times, particularly in the east, but most places dry, sunny spells and warmer still. Temperatures high teens, low to maybe mid-20s across the southeast.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel. GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country.
That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 10 minutes to 1. Now, a survey has found that the word plonker is one of 15 British insults at risk of dying out, with many younger people neither using nor understanding them.
Others include toe rag, pillock, nitwit and numpty. It's all the best ones, really.
Numpty?
It's fair to say Gen Z may struggle to get their heads around this kind of talk from legendary British comedy Only Fools and Horses.
You stupid little plonker, Rodney. Here I am on the verge of losing the biggest deal of my life, and this plonker here wants to give me a lecture about poxy butterfly.
Well, if you've got a rhinoceros, right, and one day it ain't there, you tend to know it's missing.
Don't be a plonker all your life, Rodney.
I love the word plonker.
Plonker's great, although I think, for me, numpty is the pinnacle of British insults.
Nitwit. Anyway, joining us to discuss this is comedian Bruce Devlin. Bruce, thank you so much for joining us. Do you think the world would be a worse place without the word plonker?
I don't think it would make any difference at all. I think it's a good word. Aggressive word. It sounds good, and I think people should get over themselves and stop crying about things that just don't harm them.
Are you seriously?
Plonkers.
Are you suggesting that we're getting upset over the erasure of these words? Because what the research shows is that people are taking on American insults and we're losing our British insults.
So we want British insults for British people.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
We'll get that through the Lords, no problem. No, I mean, I think the problem with younger generations, and I say that now realising I'm a slightly older person, is they believe their time is now and everything should be on their timetable or their watch. I think plonker is a fantastic word. I think the eradication of the word plonker is being done by plonkers who have no personality and need to pipe down.
Well, I think what younger people are using now, they say things, oh, you're so basic. Apparently, Brexit has become an insult, so you could say, that's so Brexit, meaning, you know, that's so lame.
Yeah,
I've never heard of that one.
I've never heard of that. I heard at the weekend, though, if it's a banging beat, you say it slaps.
Yes,
and I thought, oh, right, I kind of give in, so, yeah.
No, you can say things slap and that they have rizz. That was the word of the year last year. Rizz. It's short for charisma.
Oh, wow. Do you know something? It's the same when people, if you're called Tara and someone calls you T, I don't understand the need to shorten all these words down to look cute or happening or any of that kind of stuff. I would go back and say they are bin lids. That's a favourite insult of mine. It's not going anywhere soon.
Well, shall we have a look at some of the words? Because I want you to point out perhaps your favourite. There's numpty, prat, plonker, git, scallywag, nitwick, nitwit, pillock, toe rag, tosspot, drip, cad, ninny, blighter and bampot. Those are all the words at risk of going out.
Undoubtedly bampot. Keep bampot in because so many people are bampots. I'm very surprised you were able to use the other pot word at lunchtime, but well done you.
Now, I should say at this point, we do apologise for anyone who was offended by that. I couldn't see what was coming next in the list.
But yes, bampot, that's hardly ever used, is it?
It's used a lot in Scotland, funnily enough, along with crosspatch, but that's more my mother. She calls everyone a crosspatch, including the new leader of the SNP, John Swinney. Oh, he's a crosspatch.
But Bruce, so can we conclude from our conversation here that you're not too bothered about the language changing, and that will create new insults that are just as wonderful?
But you know something, until this generation dies out, you're not going to lose them anytime soon. It's up to the individual what they want to say. I actually feel the people that are pushing things like slapped and riz are missing out on a vocabulary-based treat.
They are. Thank you so much, Bruce Devlin. Thank you very much for your time.
You have great riz. I just think we should bring back biting our thumbs at
Don't
people.
go anywhere. We're getting all the latest reaction on the world of politics.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Not often we've been able to have a headline like this through the spring. It's been fine for a day or so in the south, but now most places joining in thanks to this area of high pressure. Not fine everywhere. There's always one or two exceptions. This weather front is bringing a little more cloud across the far northwest of Scotland through the Western Isles and some patchy rain here. A bit more cloud too over northeastern Scotland and northeast England, staying fairly grey in some places here. But for most, it's dry, fine, plenty of spring sunshine coming through, lifting those temperatures quite nicely. The coast's a little cooler, particularly where it's a little bit misty, but in the sunny spells, 22, maybe 23 degrees Celsius. That cloud thickening up across northern Scotland, Caithness, Sutherland, and then the Northern Isles, seeing a bit of rain through the evening and overnight. But for most, it'll stay dry. We'll see a bit more cloud and mist returning to parts of eastern England. Some fog patches possible across parts of southern England and South Wales as well. Temperatures in rural spots dipping to single figures, but most towns and cities staying in double digits, and most will have a cracking day tomorrow. Yes, could start a little misty, some fog patches, but they should clear fairly sharply. Some patchy rain across Shetland, but even that's on its way out by lunchtime. Some of the coasts, again, a little bit misty at times, particularly in the east, but most places dry, sunny spells and warmer still. Temperatures high teens, low to maybe mid-20s across the southeast.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The next Great British Giveaway winner could be you, with a massive £20,000 in tax-free cash to be won. Imagine how you'd react getting that winning call from us.
Hi, my name's Phil Cox, and I won the Great British Giveaway. I'd say, why not? What is it? The price of a text and £2 to enter. And if I can win it, anybody can win it. And they're going to get even more money this time round, so why wouldn't you go in the draw?
For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Many of the people that you had invited to come and speak were people who've been elected in their own countries. I'm thinking of people like Suella Braverman. I'm thinking of Nigel Farage, who has been a member of the European Parliament, of course, had an enormous impact on British politics. And Viktor Orban, who has been elected and re-elected. Many people may not care for the Prime Minister of Hungary, but he's certainly an elected person.
And in addition, we had about 15 to 16 members of the European Parliament who were also elected, and they really live in Brussels. And you would imagine that Brussels, being the head of the capital of the EU, would allow elected members of its own parliament to have an opportunity to voice their views. So I think what was very interesting about this is that the mayors overplayed their hands, so that because they overplayed their hands, all public opinion became entirely on our side. It was so evident, so transparent, that this was really an attempt to use the police instead of arguments to react to our conference, that it was a real direct threat, and it is still a direct threat to the freedom of assembly and to free speech.
So how do you think it leaves it? Is it more likely or less likely that there'll be future bans?
I think this is a trial run. And what I'm really worried about is that if the future of democracy and free speech depends on the ruling of one judge, and you have to remember that 3 other judges ruled against us, then democracy is in big trouble. What worries me absolutely is that a strong body of political opinion amongst established politicians believes that it is okay to cancel conferences and to crush people's opinions and prevent the freedom of assembly. Democracy actually depends on these foundational values.
Well, good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Thursday, the 9th of May.
Former Chancellor Nadhim Zahawi becomes the latest senior Conservative MP to announce he'll stand down at the general election, taking the Tory quitter count to 64. This on the day that one poll puts Labour an astonishing 30 points ahead of the Conservatives.
And Rishi Sunak has met with university bosses to demand assurances for the safety of Jewish students. He's warned protests are in some cases propagating outright harassment and anti-Semitic abuse. Is it time for a clampdown? We'll be debating that.
And house hunters are flocking back to London in their droves after the COVID-era exodus. But why are they doing this? Could it be, as some are claiming, because the countryside is boring?
Surely not.
That's the claim from some people, that the countryside, there's not enough to do.
Well, yes. So essentially, why we're talking about this is because there's a big piece in the papers today about this couple. Now, they left to go live in the Welsh countryside. They thought it would be an absolute dream, but they moved back 6 months later to London because they said it was boring and they had nothing left to talk to each other about. So is it the countryside that's boring, or is it these newlyweds that are boring? Let us know what you think.
If these two people believe that they are the love of each other's lives, and after 6 months they're sitting there in stony silence, I think that probably has a little bit more to do with their own relationship than the British countryside.
Yes, blame all your relationship issues on where you live. But yes, so they thought Welsh countryside was going to be an absolute dream for them. Turns out they didn't have anything to talk about and it was boring.
I have to say, sometimes I find if I'm with people that I don't know that very well or whatever, I find there is always more to talk about on a long walk through the countryside than when there's lots of distractions in big cities. I mean, I've done lots of walks in Wales, and one of the things is, I think when you're climbing a mountain or going on a coastal path or something, you never stop having things to talk about.
I feel like walking through the countryside with you would be like listening to an audiobook. Wouldn't it? It'd be like listening to an audiobook. Anyway, what do you make of that? Is the countryside boring, or are the people who don't like the countryside the boring ones? Let's get your headlines.
Emily, thank you and good afternoon. The top stories from the GB Newsroom. The Bank of England's base interest rate is unchanged for a sixth time, held at 5.25%. Economists had expected the bank to hold its rate, with inflation remaining at 3.2%, which is above the 2% target. The bank's governor, Andrew Bailey, struck an optimistic tone, saying progress was being made and its target would be met within a couple of months. The chair of the Labour Party, Annalise Dodd, says former Tory MP Natalie Elphicke has been held to account for her past comments about sexual assault. The MP for Dover announced her defection from the Tory party to Labour just moments before Prime Minister's questions yesterday. But it's ignited a backlash among some Labour MPs after comments Ms Elphicke made in defence of her former partner during his conviction for sexual assault. Well, Annalise Dodd told GB News that proper process has been followed.
Well, those were very, very serious issues. The sexual assault that was rightly prosecuted, and of course there was a parliamentary process that followed that, including a parliamentary process that applied to Natalie Elphicke. So it's absolutely right that there was accountability there. It's an incredibly important matter. Every workplace, including Parliament, has got to be free of sexual harassment.
The number of people waiting for hospital treatment is still on the rise despite the government's promise to end year-long waits by next March. Nearly 310,000 people had been waiting longer than 52 weeks for routine treatment last month. There's been some progress with referrals for suspected cancer slightly up from 64 to nearly 69%, but it's still far short of the 85%. Downing Street blamed strike action, insisting the latest figures were a significant achievement in the context of industrial action in the NHS. Commuters are facing a third consecutive day of disruption as the rail industry's longest ever strike action continues. Members of ASLEF at LNER, TransPennine Express and Northern Trains are walking out today, with none of the train companies using new laws aimed at ensuring minimum service levels during strikes. ASLEF's dispute has been running for 2 years and it hasn't met the Rail Delivery Group for fresh talks in over a year. The union claims its members haven't had a pay rise in 5 years and it's accusing the government of giving up trying to resolve the issue. But the government says drivers have been offered salaries of up to £65,000, almost twice the UK average. The Home Office has removed figures on French efforts to stop small boats launches from its website. The clear U-turn comes a little more than a week after it first started publishing the data in an effort to show cooperation between French and UK authorities. The most recent figures had shown that French authorities stopped more than 1,000 migrants from launching boats since last week. Former Chancellor Nadeem Zahawi has announced he'll step down as an MP at the next general election. He's been MP for Stratford-on-Avon for 14 years, but he was sacked as Tory party chairman in January last year after an inquiry found he'd failed to disclose that HMRC was investigating his tax affairs. In a statement posted to social media, Mr Zahawi said that his mistakes were his own, but it had been his greatest honour to serve his constituents. An 18-month-old girl has had her hearing restored after she became the first person in the world to take part in a new gene therapy trial. Opal Sandy was born deaf due to auditory neuropathy, which disrupts nerve impulses from the inner ear to the brain. Now, thanks to a new treatment being trialled here, Opal's hearing is almost normal and could even improve further. Her parents say they are delighted. And police are appealing for help locating 2 people suspected of stealing culturally significant gold artefacts from a museum. CCTV shows 2 people in hooded tops climbing through a window at Ely Museum in Cambridgeshire in the early hours of Tuesday. Footage from a second camera shows 2 people rushing past in the opposite direction, then returning seconds later, one of them apparently carrying a rucksack. Cambridgeshire Police said an item called the East Cambridgeshire Gold Talk was taken, along with a gold bracelet. Anyone with information is being asked to contact police or Crime Stoppers. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 7 minutes past 1. Now, the former Chancellor, Nadeem Zahawi, will not stand at the next general election.
Yes, the MP for Stratford-on-Avon is now the 64th Conservative to announce he will not be running, throwing the towel in. It hasn't been the easiest of rides after being embroiled in a tax controversy and being sacked as the party chairman last January. There's a little graphic showing the 64 Conservative MPs who don't fancy running again.
Yes,
but in a statement... Oh, sorry, go on.
Oh, I was just going to point out some of them. You've got Mike Freer, Graham Brady, Theresa May. People might recognise Chris Grayling, Robert Halfon, Robert Goodwill, Adam Afriyie, Lucy Allen. I mean, the list goes on and on. Chloe Smith, Alok Sharma, Paul Scully, Douglas Ross, Gary Streeter. Lots of names that people will recognise, lots of names that have been on this programme.
Yes, but will you miss them? In a statement, Nadeem Zahawi wrote, "It's time for a new energetic Conservative party," adding that my mistakes have been mine. No, a new energetic Conservative Member of Parliament for the area that he's in, saying his mistakes have been mine.
Well, let's speak to GB News political correspondent now, Olivia Utley, because this is becoming a steady drumbeat. The Prime Minister wanted a steady drumbeat of Rwanda flights going off this summer. Instead, he's got resignations.
He has 64 resignations. Now, to put that in context, in 1997, before the Blair landslide, there were 75 Conservative resignations. We're still not at the general election. We could easily get up to 75 by then, and already we're at a higher percentage of the parliamentary party than back in 1997. By contrast, only I think it's 18 Labour MPs have said that they won't be standing at the next election. It very much feels as though quite a lot of these Conservative MPs are worried that they're going to lose their seat, or if not, that they're just not particularly interested in being part of what might well be a very small and weak opposition. In the case of Nadeem Zahawi, he does have a big majority in Stratford-on-Avon. He got 60% of the vote last time. Of course, that doesn't mean that he's completely safe. No Conservative majority is safe at the moment. We are seeing unprecedented swings towards the Labour Party in by-election after by-election. But it seems more likely that Zahawi just isn't really interested in being a backbench MP in a weak Conservative opposition. It is a blow for Rishi Sunak. Yes, Zahawi had to stand aside because of concerns about his tax affairs. He covered up an HMRC investigation into his tax affairs, but he is widely regarded was widely regarded as an efficient minister, an effective local MP, and he's admired. His backstory is really impressive, coming from Baghdad, only speaking a little bit of English and then setting up YouGov before going into politics. This is the sort of calibre of MP that the Conservative Party can't really afford to lose.
Yes, and this comes, of course, after the shock news that Natalie Elphicke, was Conservative MP for Dover and Deal, defected to the Labour Party, and the reactions are starting to come through thick and fast. Of course, lots of Conservative MPs making jokes, saying this is awful, saying what does this mean Keir Starmer actually stands for if he just welcomes in a right-wing Conservative MP like that. But also Labour voices coming out. We've had John McDonnell expressing his concern. We've now got the Labour leader of the Dover District Council saying that he reacted with horror and that he's extremely concerned.
Well, exactly. And I mean, there are plenty of Conservative MPs who are suggesting that actually Natalie Elphicke is exactly the calibre of MP that the Conservative Party can afford to lose. Obviously, her political opinions are very much to the right of the Conservative Party. Almost all Conservative MPs I've spoken to would say that they are to the left of Natalie Elphicke. She was part of the ERG. She was part of the New Conservatives group, that socially conservative group set up by Miriam Cates and Danny Kruger. But also, I mean, that makes her controversial. But what makes her sort of widely disliked, actually on both sides of the House, is the fact that she stood by her now ex-husband, Charlie Elphicke, when he was convicted of sexual abuse. She suggested that he had been punished for being attracted and attractive to women. Now, those are not the sort of comments you expect to hear from any politician, let alone a Labour MP. So there are sort of jokes on the Conservative backbenches and real consternation among some Labour MPs who think that Keir Starmer should have said no when Natalie Elphicke approached him. Of course, if you sort of get out of the Westminster bubble a little bit and think of an ordinary voter who may just, glance at the headlines on GB News of an evening but isn't wrapped up in the minutiae of what's going on, of course this is a win for Labour. Someone defecting from the Conservatives to the Labour Party, someone on the front line of the immigration debate, the MP for Dover, deciding that she trusts the Labour Party more on immigration. So there are two different ways of looking at it, but Keir Starmer is facing a big backlash from Labour MPs today, especially female Labour MPs.
Yes, it's interesting, perhaps, that there was another MP who was suspended by Starmer some months ago because of a newsletter she wrote on Holocaust Memorial Day talking about what she described as a genocide in Gaza to be thought of on that day. She was suspended for that and brought back into the Labour Party yesterday. I wonder if that was a response from the leadership of the Labour Party trying to shore up some of the left flank or some of those very unhappy MPs taking on quite a right-wing Conservative MP. He had to take back one of the left-wingers he expelled for what was accused to be an anti-Semitic incident, taking back in just to steady the ship, perhaps.
I don't think it was a coincidence that Kate Osamor was given back the Labour whip yesterday. I think you're quite right, Tom. I think there will be plenty of left-wing Labour MPs who are spitting feathers at the idea that someone like Natalie Elphicke, a real hardliner on immigration, someone with very conservative views, socially conservative views, can be accepted into the Labour Party. But some of these more left-wing Labour MPs don't seem to be welcome there anymore. I think that this was definitely a case of Keir Starmer trying to placate the Labour left, who haven't really been happy since the removal of Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Olivia Utley, GB News political correspondent. A huge amount going on, and of course that poll that shows Labour Party are now 30 points ahead of the Conservatives, at least according to that YouGov survey. Quite extraordinary.
Well, but doesn't that just show? I mean, I know that a lot of the field work for that poll was done before the defection, but it will be very interesting to see further polls. I would think that that poll shows that the strategy of the Labour Party, praising Margaret Thatcher, trying to see more right-wing than Rishi Sunak on some areas, they'll be delighted with conversations like the one that we've just had, where the casual observer might just hear, oh, the Labour Party's got an MP who's very tough on immigration now. And that's exactly the sort of impression that they want to make.
Are we that fickle? Are the British public that fickle? Let us know. But joining us now is political commentator Stephen Carlton-Woods. Stephen, hard to know where to start with everything that's going on in the world of politics, the world of Westminster, also Holyrood and everywhere else, and in Wales too, the Welsh Parliament. But let's start with Nadim Zahawi and his decision not to stand at the general election. He's served as an MP for 14 years, is it? 14 years?
14 years.
14 years. So all the time that the Conservatives have been in power in one way or another. Do you think he just doesn't fancy being in opposition?
I don't know, really. I think he sees his political career at its limits now after his tax problem last year. So probably that's got a big part to play in this. And then with the current political climate and the Conservative Party moving forward, I think he's probably got better things to be doing now than hanging around Westminster.
He's just got too many options. He's been a minister, he's been a Chancellor, he's ticked that box. Now on to something more lucrative.
Yeah, well, I mean, he was a big businessman, a very successful businessman, so I always question, really. It's great that we have such a calibre of person in Westminster, but I think if I was that calibre of person, I really wouldn't want to be in Westminster. I'd want to be doing other things with my life.
Well, it's supposed to be the greatest privilege.
Well, it is. It is a privilege, and they will all say it's a great privilege to serve the country. But the baggage that comes with that, and all the, your life is completely overtaken, and you're in the spotlight all the time. So any little mistakes that you do are amplified, really. So I'm sure he'll have a much calmer life moving on and doing other things. But I think it's a big loss to the Conservative Party, that calibre of person deciding not to continue.
Yes, I imagine so.
I want to move on now to this other big issue, of course, the reaction to the defection yesterday, the sensational defection that actually saw Natalie Elphicke sit in the middle of the Labour benches during Prime Minister's questions. All of her colleagues around her, her new colleagues, her Labour colleagues, looking incredibly uncomfortable. I've never seen Labour MPs squirm quite so much.
They must hate it.
When sitting amongst their own side. But there has been a lot of commentary, not just around the politics of Natalie Elphicke, but the personal conduct of her. Gabriel Pogrund is a journalist at The Times, and he wrote that Natalie Elphicke, his words, cruelly and publicly tormented the victims of her sex offender ex-husband, Charlie. Gabriel Pogrund then goes on to say, there are other things I cannot report. The number of rumours swirling Westminster about the conduct of Natalie Elphicke and her husband Charlie Elphicke, particularly with regard to sex crimes, is fairly shocking.
Yes, it is. But yesterday came to a big surprise to many people when that happened. I remember the news breaking, and I couldn't believe what was going on. But the biggest question there, I can't believe that Keir Starmer accepted her into the party. I mean, she has no values at all that are in line with the Labour Party, and she's not covered herself in glory at all. So another one that was stepping down, apparently, anyway, for the next term. Where's she going to go from here? I don't think she's done herself any favours.
So what's her game plan then, do you reckon, Stephen? Why do you think she's done this?
I'm really at a loss for this one. I can't think. If you was really going to expand your career, maybe is there a done deal behind the scenes with Labour? I wouldn't think so. And I would have thought reform would have been more in line with her ideals.
But Stephen, reform's not going to form the next government.
Yes.
So Keir Starmer is likely to. Perhaps there has been some sort of job offered.
She doesn't want to stand as an MP going forward.
No, but she could run a Quango. She could get a czar-type role. There are all numbers.
She wrote a lot about housing, didn't she? She wrote a lot about housing.
I think that's probably what is on the cards behind the scenes. But we're only speculating at the moment. No one knows, or no one's admitting to any sort of backdoor deals that may not have been done.
No, I think we'll find a lot of these defectors that are now going on to stand down might well get public appointments. Dr Dan Poulter is another example. A few weeks ago, former Tory MP, now Labour MP, he could very well run a commission to do with the NHS. He could have been promised something in the vast web of state appointments.
Well, I think that's probably the case there as well, yes.
Yes.
Well, Stephen Carlton-Woods, thank you very much for joining us and talking through the aftershocks of some big political stories.
These backroom deals, potentially.
Grubby business politics.
Anyway, in other news, institutions are under pressure to act against pro-Palestinian protests on campus. The Prime Minister's told university bosses to show zero tolerance towards anti-Semitism. So, is it time to clamp down on these university protests? We'll be debating that very shortly.
Dubes & Co. Weekdays from 6 p.m.
Organisations, plural, because there's loads of people doing this. The organisations are charging schools to be part of this odd league table about who's trying to outdo who when it comes to who is more trans inclusive with the kids than the next person. There's something that makes me uneasy about this.
Supposing a child comes home and says, you think, oh, I've done well today. He said, well, how have you done? He said, well, I was #1 painter, or I was #1 reader. No, I wasn't. I was made LGBT champion. This is a 4- and 5-year-old. Look, I can understand this, actually, as we develop into the secondary school. I can understand more debates taking place. I cannot understand why we have to thrust it at young children. And I think if you ask the parents, they'd be hostile to it. And what about the role the teacher has to play in all this?
Society has been one way, the pendulum is swinging the other way, and they're pushing it very far in order to kind of proliferate change. And this is probably the toughest period in that evolutionary process, because the LGBTQ+ community is saying that you've got to really rage against the machine to get people to listen. Because put it like this now, even this conversation, the whole country is listening, the whole world is listening. These are the kinds of eyeballs and ears they haven't had before. And there's going to be friction. There's going to be a locking of heads in the process to getting to a point where you establish a new equilibrium where they feel more incorporated. Like I've said, the greatest force of allies that the LGBTQ+ community has always had is heterosexual women. What you're moving towards now is doing things that is beginning to turn them from allies into people who feel that, oh, for you to thrive, I'm being deprived, and that's a problem. When they realise you're alienating allies, they will understand you've got to recalibrate to have that kind of understanding between both parties.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News with Dubes & Co from 6, followed by Farage at 7. At 8, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg addresses the state of the nation. And at 9, join Patrick Christie's Tonight, followed by Headliners at 11. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking... This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, it's 1:24. Good afternoon, Britain. Now, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, is meeting university leaders up and down the country today over campus protests.
Yes, the Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, is joining the Prime Minister and university leaders to discuss tackling anti-Semitism on campuses.
So, as the Prime Minister is meeting all of these university bosses, we're asking, is it time to clamp down on student protests at British universities, or would that be a affront to civil liberties? Joining us now to debate this is author and broadcaster Rebecca Reid, who doesn't think that university protests should be clamped down on, and the leader of UKIP, Neil Hamilton, who does think they should be. Rebecca, so many Jewish groups, anti-Semitism campaigners have expressed multiple concerns about students feeling intimidated, harassed on campuses, and it's clear these protests are very much adding towards that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely respect and understand that. And anti-Semitism is intolerable and should not be tolerated. I think the difficulty is it's a very, very broad tool to say because there is anti-Semitism happening on some campuses at some protests, we are going to shut down protests. And I am worried about the government's increasingly intolerant attitude towards protest in general. I think Suella Braverman illustrated that fairly clearly, that it seems like they would like to be able to shut down protests more and more often. And I feel like that's a slippery slope. I think the right to protest should be an inalienable human right.
Well, let's throw that over to Neil Hamilton. Neil, is this not a tricky one for free speech absolutists? There's lots of things that are legal to say in the United Kingdom that happen to be anti-Semitic, that happen to be horrible, and you wouldn't want to say, but they're still legal.
Yeah, but the real intolerance here, of course, is the cause that these students are demonstrating in favour of. You know, from the river to the sea means the physical annihilation of the state of Israel, and along with that goes the annihilation of the Jewish people in the minds of quite a lot of the Hamas-related hotheads who are behind these protests ultimately. Of course, the students are just the useful idiots for these people. You know, I've lived through this many times before in my lifetime. When I was a student, it was the high point of student revolt in 1968. You know, they were real demonstrations compared with the ones that we've got today. It's a question of proportion, isn't it? These permanent demonstrations have now gone on for too long. Yes, I believe in the right to free speech and the right to make your point, but not when it's every single week and it's there in your face every single day. And by the scale and size of these marches, they are in themselves intimidating to Jewish students and Jewish minorities. There are only 300,000 Jews in the whole country, 6.5 million Muslims. And given the scale of these marches in London and elsewhere, as well as in universities, I think that it's out of all proportion, and vice-chancellors ought to take a tough line.
Rebecca, we've seen how these types of protests have escalated over in the United States on university campuses over there. Is there not an argument to try and nip them in the bud here?
I don't think so, because I think however much you dislike a cause, you still have to tolerate the right to protest. So I find the anti-abortion marches abhorrent. I think if you are anti-choice, you are a fundamentally evil human being. However, they still have to do it. I don't think there's an excuse for it. I think it's an intolerable attitude. However, they still have to be able to have their marches. They just do. Otherwise, if you say no to ones that you don't like when you're in power, people will say no to the ones that they don't like when you're in power. We have to let everybody have their go. And yes, they are annoying, and yes, they are in your face. But as with Just Stop Oil, as with any of them, protest is designed to be inconvenient and attention grabbing. It's not a protest if you all queue up neatly and let people go ahead.
Neil?
Well, it's a conflict of rights, isn't it? It's a conflict of rights. Peaceful, law-abiding citizens have a right to go about their lives in the way that they want, not inhibited or in any way inconvenienced by other people. Now, there has to be a balance here, and all I'm saying is there should be a balance, and the balance so far is skewed very, very heavily in favour of the disruptors. You don't have every week anti-abortion marches up and down the country in vast numbers. Whatever your views are on abortion, I believe both sides should have the right peacefully to protest. If it goes beyond a certain point, then I think the general public has a right to say that our rights need to be considered and taken into account.
May I just ask Rebecca something? Because we have seen at one university, I'm sure you've seen the story, a pro-Israel, a Jewish student, waved an Israeli flag. It immediately got ripped off him from pro-Palestine protesters at a university. Should that not be an indication then to just shut down that protest? Clearly, it's discriminatory against one student. Do their rights not count?
I think there's two things. Firstly, we have to be really careful that we don't conflate being pro-Israel and being Jewish. Those two things aren't necessarily the same thing. So there are Jewish people who do not support Israel, and there are non-Jewish people who do support Israel. So I think it's just important when we talk about it not to conflate the two. I would say that you have to wait for something illegal to happen before you can arrest somebody. And if anybody is being anti-Semitic, they should be thrown out of university. It should be properly investigated first, obviously, but they should not be able to continue at the university, and the police should intervene completely. But you have to let something happen before you can convict somebody of it. And I think, shutting down protests because something might happen is so dangerous and so slippery. And then it's easy for any person in power to say, well, we think these people might be a bit dangerous one day, so we'll stop them before it's happened. And then you are stopping protest.
Neil, you mentioned the 1960s, 1968, 1969. In Paris, in the United Kingdom, in California, the world was on fire at universities. I mean, this is nothing in comparison. Surely it doesn't merit the same sort of clampdown that we saw in the late 1960s.
Well, in October 1968, during the Democrat convention in Chicago, the mayor actually... the university actually got the National Guard to fire on the students. Well, I'm not suggesting that we should go back to that, obviously. But I do think that we've got to keep things in proportion here. And the main point that I want to make also is that what is the purpose of these demonstrations? Ultimately, there isn't going to be a ceasefire because Hamas doesn't want a ceasefire in the long term. They want to annihilate the state of Israel. So it's a preposterous proposition to start with. And given that the idea behind this is to destroy a state and a people by overt acts of violence, in a sense, these demonstrations are trying to sanitize something which is revolting. And we've seen demonstrations, for example, on National Holocaust Day, which are about the most disgusting sight that you would ever see, the behavior that took place then. So I don't think that we can give any credence to the motives of the people behind these protests. Why aren't they protesting about the hostages that Hamas still won't release? What about the October the 7th massacres, which are the ultimate cause of all this current turmoil in the Middle East? That's what they should be protesting against, the right for Israel peacefully to exist.
Rebecca, just a quick word from you to finish.
I would just say that what a lot of the... I believe in Israel's right to exist, but what I would say is a lot of these students are protesting against their university having links in terms of funding, sponsorship and research with Israel as a state. So it's not that they are saying... They're not demonstrating because they want it to be...
Well, why not they demonstrating?
May I just say, Rebecca, it is worth pointing out that Israel is a huge part of a lot of Jewish people's identity. So ripping an Israeli flag out of a Jewish student's hand is seen as incredibly inflammatory to many Jewish people and a stigmatisation. But I accept what you say, that not all Jewish people are as attached to Israel in the same sense. But thank you very much, Rebecca Reid and Neil Hamilton. Good stuff.
Right, we've got to get some breaking news now. We were just discussing how Labour's newest Member of Parliament, now Natalie Elphicke, has apologised for comments she made supporting her ex-husband after he was convicted of sexual assault following criticism from her new party colleagues. So she has now apologised for comments she made supporting her ex-husband after he was convicted of sexual assault. Of course, she hasn't apologised for those comments up until this point, despite some senior members of the shadow cabinet suggesting that she had. But she has now apologised after that criticism.
That's very interesting indeed. We'll come back to that in a little bit. We're also going to be talking about actor Hugh Grant, because he's hit out at Apple, the tech company, of course, saying their new iPad advert is tasteless. It is quite intriguing. I personally do not like this advert, but I'd like to get your assessment of it.
Great advert.
We'll be watching and reviewing. We'll have a little bit of a ding-dong, I imagine. Latest headlines with Tatiana now.
Emily, thank you. The top stories this hour. The Bank of England's base interest rate is unchanged for a sixth time, held at 5.25%. Economists had expected the bank to hold its rate, with inflation remaining at 3.2%, which is above the 2% target. The bank's governor, Andrew Bailey, struck an optimistic tone, saying progress was being made and its target would be met within a couple of months. Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, says it's clear the economy has not turned a corner.
Bank of England's decision today is its independent right to make decisions about interest rates, but clearly that's bad news for people at home who are having to reset their mortgages for the years ahead at a more expensive rate, and for people having to pay rent for their homes. And that's why the economy has not turned a corner, and why people at home are not feeling any uptick when they're told by Conservative ministers doing victory laps this week that the country has turned a corner when it hasn't.
And as you've just been hearing some breaking news, the new Labour MP Natalie Elphicke has apologised for comments she made about sexual assault. The MP for Dover announced her defection from the Tory party to the Labour Party just moments before Prime Minister's questions yesterday, but has ignited a backlash among some Labour MPs after comments that she had made in defence of her former partner, who was convicted of assaulting two women. The Home Office has removed figures on French efforts to stop small boat launches from its website. The clear U-turn comes a little more than a week after it first started publishing the data in an effort to show cooperation between French and UK authorities. The most recent figures had shown that French authorities stopped more than 1,000 migrants from launching boats since last week. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2483 and €1.1628. The price of gold is £1,856.55 per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 6,375 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Hello, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Not often we've been able to have a headline like this through the spring. It's been fine for a day or so in the south, but now most places joining in thanks to this area of high pressure. Not fine everywhere. There's always one or two exceptions. This weather front is bringing a little more cloud across the far northwest of Scotland through the Western Isles and some patchy rain here. A bit more cloud too over northeastern Scotland and northeast England, staying fairly grey in some places here. But for most it's dry, fine, plenty of spring sunshine coming through, lifting those temperatures quite nicely. The coast's a little cooler, particularly where it's a little bit misty, but in the sunny spells, 22, maybe 23 degrees Celsius. That cloud thickening up across northern Scotland, Caithness, Sutherland, and then the Northern Isles, seeing a bit of rain through the evening and overnight, but for most it'll stay dry. We'll see a bit more cloud and mist returning to parts of eastern England. Some fog patches possible across parts of southern England and South Wales as well. Temperatures in rural spots dipping to single figures, but most towns and cities staying in double digits, and most will have a cracking day tomorrow. Yes, could start a little misty, some fog patches, but they should clear fairly sharply. Some patchy rain across Shetland, but even that's on its way out by lunchtime. Some of the coasts, again, a little bit misty at times, particularly in the east, but most places dry, sunny spells and warmer still. Temperatures high teens, low to maybe mid-20s across the southeast.
The latest GB News travel.
Hello to you, I'm Jules Buckley. Let's go to Derbyshire firstly, where the northbound M1 struggling just before Chesterfield and Mansfield. At junction 29, the inside lane's coned off whilst a collision is dealt with. Now, there's one being investigated in Herefordshire, so the A49 currently closed between the OK Diner roundabout in Wufferton and the Wufferton Crossroads in Brinfield. That is queuing for investigation work. 2 lanes closed southbound M5 due to a bump between Thornbury 14 and the M4 at junction 15, a little bit slow. Long delays anti-clock towards the Dartford Tunnel, 2 for the M25. Delays back towards Swanley following an earlier broken down lorry. Do check the trains before you travel today. Again, strike action on some operators, including LNER, Northern and Transpennine Express. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Well, we brought you the breaking news that Labour's newest MP, Natalie Elphicke, who of course defected from the Conservative Party yesterday, she's now, after quite some time, responded to all the criticism about her previous comments about her former husband.
Yes, she of course had said that she stood by her former husband, who is a convicted sex offender. She seemed to blame the women, saying that her former husband was attractive, and that's why all these women seemed to have relations with him. Quite extraordinary comments.
Yeah, she's put out a bit of a long statement, so we won't read it absolutely all to you. But she says, the period of 2017 to 2020 was an incredibly stressful and difficult one for me, as I learnt more about the person I thought I knew. I know it was far harder for the women who had to relive their experiences and give evidence against him. I have previously and do condemn his behaviour towards other women and towards me. It was right that he was prosecuted, she says, and I'm sorry for the comments that I made about his victims. She goes on to say it is vital that women can have confidence in the criminal justice system, and our rates of prosecution and conviction are far too low as a country. She goes on to talk about Keir Starmer's mission to halve male violence against women and girls. She says that's critical, and she wants to take the opportunity to express her explicit support for Labour colleagues working to realise this. So there you go.
It's worth saying that when this story came out in 2022 in full in The Times, the Sunday Times revealed how he had used British libel law to silence many of those who had complained against him. Lots of Labour MPs at the time commented on this, saying what an appalling situation what this was. Jess Phillips said that the ordeal these women had has been appalling, and those who helped harm them have no place in our politics. One could argue that that might have included not just Charlie Elphicke, but his wife who supported him.
Well, I wonder if Keir Starmer impressed on her the importance of her making this apology.
Well, then why didn't she do it
perhaps
yesterday?
Labour MPs like Jess Phillips were saying to Keir Starmer, you need to make her apologise for all this, otherwise we won't accept her.
Well, it was interesting because Annalisa Dodds, the chair of the Labour Party, was having some interviews this morning, and she claimed to multiple journalists, she's addressed this, she's apologised. Turns out she hadn't.
Well, she says here that she has condemned his behaviour. She says, I have previously and do condemn his behaviour towards women and towards me. So will that be the end of this? Will that be the end of this for Natalie, or will it continue to come up again and again.
It seems like it's all a little bit messy. There are lots of holes in what has happened, and the Labour Party is going around trying to plug them. I bet she didn't write this statement. This statement was written by a Labour press officer.
Yes, it does sound like it. She does say quite a lot about how fantastic the Labour Party is and all of this. But yes, in other news, actor Hugh Grant has hit out at Apple's new iPad advert.
Yes, he's called it tasteless, saying it ruins the human experience.
He's actually right about this one, I think. The advert features musical instruments and art being crushed. Let's take a watch.
Winners come and they go, and we watch the melting snow. So as summer follows spring, all the things you do give me a reason to build my world around you. Come and follow rainbows, I am sure.
The most powerful iPad ever is also the thinnest.
All I ever need.
It's a great advert.
It's absolutely miserable.
It's brilliant. It's showing
So
all of
depressing,
these
Tom.
things compressed into this little, very thinner than an iPod Nano.
It's saying be glued to your screen all day. You don't have to, you know, actually try painting in real life. You don't actually have to read a book. You don't even have
not
to
what it's saying
play
at
with
all.
your children. You don't even have to go outside because it's all on your iPad. And, you know, Hugh Grant winds me up quite a lot. It winds me up quite a lot. But he's absolutely spot on about this. He says this is the destruction of human experience courtesy of Silicon Valley.
Just by advertising what the iPad does, by saying, look, it can do music and painting and art and books and films and sculpture, like, because that's all in there. He's not allowed to. Apple aren't allowed to say that. Aren't allowed to advertise that. Look, this is all of these things that this marvellous little machine can do.
Tom, you're wrong. You're just wrong. It's a really negative advert about how, you know, you can encapsulate all human experience or whatever and all of these different activities just in this little bit of metal.
But you can!
Yes, but why not?
Why can't Apple show
it's pretty
what's going
It's
what
pretty
the iPad's
obvious
capable of?
that technology, while it has many, many positives, Tom, I will concede that, is taking away real experience from a lot of us. You know, people only communicating via WhatsApp. We were doing how Gen Z don't pick up the phone or can't make phone calls anymore. You know, why learn an instrument when you can get a piece of music played on your iPad? Why paint a picture when you can doodle on an iPad thing? Why speak to anyone when you can talk to a chatbot on the internet?
That's not a complaint against
You
what
prefer
was
talking to a chatbot than me.
Quite a creative advert of squashing all this stuff down, and it's in the vein of, you can see a lot of these videos online of various things going into crushers. They're brilliant, and they all explode and all the rest of it. Doing that to show how thin the new iPad is and what it can all do is quite a clever and creative thing. That's a completely separate issue to the real social problems of going into restaurants and seeing kids with iPads in their faces, not talking to their families.
What's with the clamp?
I'll agree with you there.
What's with the clamps squashing all of the things that people once enjoyed?
There's a common theme of video online where you can see all sorts of things. You can see sort of rubber balls put in clamps, and you can see various household items being squashed by these industrial presses.
I don't think that an iPad. I don't think an iPad is a good alternative to actually experiencing all of these nice things in real life, but that's my view. gbnews.com/your say is for your view at home, and let us know. But house buyers, they're reportedly flocking back to cities, and some are saying, in the case of a couple of newlyweds, that it's because the countryside is just boring and they've got nothing to talk about there. We're having that chat after the break.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, weekdays from 9 p.m.
Today is a good day for the King, a good day for Britain. I'm sure you'll be hoping that those Not My King morons decide to give it a rest for a little while, because he is still dealing with an illness, isn't he?
He's still dealing with an illness, and he appears to be dealing extremely well. I think he comes from the fact that he's extremely strong and fit. I think I understand that will help his treatment enormously. And I think, as your professor was saying, it's the fatigue that can be a brutal thing when you're trying to lead a normal life with cancer. But I think that it's going to really help him psychologically to get out there, and people are going to be giving him enormous support. I mean, I know, as you say, there's an anti-monarchy brigade, but there's been an anti-monarchy brigade since there's been a monarchy. So that is not such a big deal. It has always been there. I feel that Charles is going to get a lot of support from the sort of joyousness of people seeing him and, you know, wishing him well. And I think that that's going to be immensely important to him. It's a very busy time, but I think a boost for William and Kate. William's out and about. We don't know about Kate, but I feel that the King will definitely. It's a very busy time coming up with the anniversary of D-Day in Normandy, which I know he will be desperate to be a part of. Then there's the big royal season, the trooping the colour, the Garter ceremony, royal ascot, and then he is hosting the Emperor and Empress of Japan at the end of June. So it's a absolutely packed month for someone that is presumably going to get very tired.
Yes, indeed. I mean, if he gets through all of that, I think that will be absolutely massive, won't it?
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go. How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Right, it's 1:50 in the afternoon, and is the countryside boring? And are cities much more exciting, better places to live?
Well, apparently house buyers are returning to cities in their droves following a COVID-era exodus.
Yes, in August 2021, almost half of London-based house hunters were looking to leave the capital, according to data from the property website Rightmove anyway. But now they're returning back, including one couple who went from London to Wales to pursue a dream countryside life. But after just 6 months, they returned because of, quote, xenophobic locals, a depressed dog, and, crucially, boring locals. I didn't realise they'd call them xenophobic as well.
That's extraordinary.
Good grief. Well, there you go.
Well, let's get the view now of arable farmer Andrew Ward, MBE. Andrew, you're standing in the countryside now for us. You must be bored.
Well, when you look here, I don't know whether you can see it. I've got a tractor over my left shoulder planting sugar beets at the minute. I'm out in the Lincolnshire countryside. We've got birds singing above us all the time, skylarks in particular. And it's the most glorious place to be, producing food in an environment where you can relax, just soak up nature and the sun. I mean, how boring is this? It's fantastic, this is. I always think when I go to London, I actually think the same when I go to London, because I go there 3 or 4 times a year, and I get there and I can't wait to come back home to this.
Andrew, your tractor's just come into view behind you. It's majestically, what is it doing, tilling the soil or something?
No, it's planting sugar beet, and so this will end up on your table as silver spoon, which with British sugar, so not imported cane sugar. This is sugar that will end up on your table grown from British sugar beets, such as this behind me.
Lovely. Andrew, you must have the most spectacular T-shirt tan from standing out there in the British countryside. What do you say about these Londoner types who think that moving to the countryside is going to be this dream experience, and then they find that actually they find it boring, and they say things like the locals are xenophobic? Is it them that's the boring ones?
Well, I would say so, because whenever I do come to London, when I don't know my way around the underground, and if I've asked people which way do I go or which platforms I want, I get ignored. And I actually find Londoners are very rude because they just ignore you. And all I want to do is ask directions. And but I think when you start to look at the countryside, there is no doubt, just being serious for a minute, there is no doubt that it is a different way of life to the town or the city. There's no doubt about that. And we do have certain things that we have to do because we have to look after nature. We want to look after nature and wildlife. And I did see the report you just mentioned, that I think they said that if the dog was actually let off the lead, it would be shot. Well, I don't know whether that's quite right. What I've seen are signs that if a dog is actually worrying livestock, then legally a farmer is allowed to shoot the dog. But as in all these cases, it's normally the owner that's the problem, not the dog, because they let it off the lead in the first place. Yes. So I think the countryside is different to the city, and everybody needs to recognise that, but just enjoy it. But no way is it boring.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head there. When you're walking, sometimes there's a very odd, inversely proportional relationship between the number of people in a place and the willingness of those people to talk to one another. When you're in a bustling, crowded city, weirdly, it can feel more lonely than if you're out on a walk and pass someone else. You're much more likely to have a conversation.
That's because no one trusts each other in London, do they? No one trusts each other.
No,
there's more trust in the countryside, isn't there?
Yeah, I think there is, and I think the thing especially with farming, whether it's country life or farming, you don't very rarely go anywhere without you know someone. Everybody knows somebody in that area, and I must admit, when I do come to London, I stay at the Farmers Club just off Whitehall, and I go there and I'm a member there. And when I walk in there at night, there is always farmers in there from other parts of the country, and it's like walking into my local. So that is the only time in London that I actually feel welcome.
So you bring the countryside to London when you come. Thank you so much, Andrew Ward, MB. Really great to speak to you. Enjoy the rest of your day, arable farmer. Andrew Ward there. Well, there you go. He told them.
Absolutely. No, I think there's so much truth to what he was saying, and there is nothing that beats a good countryside walk across either a coastal path or even through some of our undulating hills.
Well, coming up, we'll have the very latest on that apology from Labour's brand new, spanking new MP, Natalie Elphicke.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Tomorrow, well, more of the same pretty much for most places. A fine, fairly warm spring day. It's not been glorious everywhere today. There's been quite a bit of cloud around across parts of the north and some outbreaks of rain just trickling across northern Scotland. That'll continue through the night across northern parts of the mainland up towards the Northern Isles. For most, though, it's going to be a dry night with clear spells. A bit of mist and low cloud returning to parts of eastern England, and in southern England, South Wales, maybe 1 or 2 fog patches around. Temperatures could dip down as low as 4 or 3 degrees in some rural spots. Most towns and cities, though, staying in double digits. And a fine day to come on Friday. Any morning fog in the south will clear pretty quickly. Some mistiness around some coasts, perhaps parts of Norfolk and Suffolk. Some damp weather early on across Shetland, but that should scoot away. Small chance of an afternoon shower over northern England and southern Scotland, but the vast majority dry, fine and warmer than today. 21, 22, maybe 23, 24 in a few places. Fine day to come on Saturday as well. Perhaps again some of this mist and low cloud just threatening to make it quite murky on some eastern coasts, but for most dry, fine and sunny. Maybe again 1 or 2 isolated, but perhaps heavy showers over northern England and southern Scotland. But generally more spring sunshine to come and warmer still. 23, 24, maybe 25 on Saturday in those sunny spells. Bye for now.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's the biggest cash prize we've given away to date. An incredible £20,000 that you could use however you like. And because it's totally tax-free, every single penny will be in your bank account to do whatever you like with. £20,000 in tax-free cash really could be yours this summer. But you've got to be in it to win it. For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, Text PRIZE to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Thursday, the 9th of May.
The newest Labour MP, Natalie Elphicke, has apologised for comments she made supporting her ex-husband after he was convicted of sexual assault. This comes following criticism from her new party colleagues.
And Rishi Sunak meets with university bosses to demand assurances for the safety of Jewish students. He's warned protests are in some cases propagating outright harassment and anti-Semitic abuse. Is it time for a clampdown? We'll cross live to one of these British encampments.
And whilst Prince Harry appears to have celebrated the anniversary of the Invictus Games during his time in the UK this week, he has failed to see his father and brother. We'll be asking whether the Dukes had a successful visit. Yes, so we're going to be crossing live to one of these student protests to see if they're multiplying or if it's still only a few tents. Will it be a huge tent city now? What you said the other day, maybe it was yesterday even, about the fact that you're not actually allowed by college rules in Oxbridge to even stand or walk on the grass, but yet we see tents everywhere, which presumably have pegs, which presumably ruin the grass.
There's an old anecdote about an American who visited one of the colleges at Cambridge University and said, "How do you get your grass so luscious, so green, so splendid looking?" And the college principal or whoever said, "Well, we get out every morning, we roll the grass, we make sure it's watered and fed properly, and no one's allowed to walk on it." And the American goes, "Well, that's what we do." And then the Brit goes, "Well, you missed the most crucial bit. We do it for 800 years.
Yes. Well, it's funny that you mention the Americans because from looking at these protests and hearing from some of the people at them, there's quite a lot of American student activists who are taking part in these encampments, almost as if they're importing this trend to this country, although I'm sure the British students could think of it themselves if they tried hard enough.
Yes.
But there you go. We're going to be live at those encampments to see exactly what they're protesting about. Do they understand their cause properly? Do they think they have the moral high ground on this one? What do they make of concerns over harassment, intimidation and fear felt among some Jewish students?
And why are they all wearing COVID masks?
Well, that's
outdoors?
a good question. That's a very good question. Keep your views coming in on everything we're discussing. gbnews.com/your say is the way to do that. Shall we get the headlines with Tatiana?
Emily, thank you. The top stories from the GB newsroom. The Bank of England's base interest rate is unchanged for a sixth time, held at 5.25%. Economists had expected the bank to hold its rate, with inflation remaining at 3.2%, which is above the 2% target. The bank's governor, Andrew Bailey, struck an optimistic tone, saying progress was being made and its target would be met within a couple of months. Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, says it's clear the economy has not turned a corner.
Bank of England's decision today is its independent right to make decisions about interest rates, but clearly that's bad news for people at home who are having to reset their mortgages for the years ahead at a more expensive rate, and for people having to pay rent for their homes. And that's why the economy has not turned a corner and why people at home are not feeling any uptick when they're told by Conservative ministers doing victory laps this week that the country has turned a corner when it hasn't.
New Labour MP Natalie Elphicke has apologised for comments she made about sexual assault. The MP for Dover announced her defection from the Tories to Labour just moments before Prime Minister's questions yesterday. But it's ignited a backlash among some Labour MPs after comments she made in defence of her former partner, who was convicted of assaulting 2 women. The chair of the Labour Party, Annalise Dodd, says she has been held to account for her past comments.
Well, those were very, very serious issues. The sexual assault that was rightly prosecuted, and of course there was a parliamentary process that followed that, including a parliamentary process that applied to Natalie Elphicke. So it's absolutely right that there was accountability there. It's an incredibly important matter. Every workplace, including Parliament, has got to be free of sexual harassment.
Protesters are gathering in Malmo's Central Square in support of Palestine ahead of the second Eurovision semi-final. If you're watching on television, you can see live pictures of the historic Stortegert Market Square. Hundreds of demonstrators can be seen waving Palestinian flags in opposition to Israel's participation in the song contest. Crowds could be heard booing during Israel's performance last night by Eden Golan. Organisers were also forced to apologise after Sweden's Eric Saad wore a Palestinian scarf, a breach of the contest ban on political symbols. In other news, the number of people waiting for hospital treatment is still going up despite the government's promise to end year-long waits by next March. Nearly 310,000 people had been waiting longer than 52 weeks for routine treatment last month. There's been some progress, with referrals for suspected cancer slightly up from 64 to nearly 69%. But it's still far short of the 85% target. Downing Street blamed strike action, insisting the latest figures were a significant achievement in the context of industrial action within the health service. The Home Office has removed figures on French efforts to stop small boat launches from its website. The clear U-turn comes a little more than a week after it first started publishing the data in an effort to show cooperation between French and UK authorities. The most recent figures had shown that French authorities stopped more than 1,000 migrants from launching boats since last week. Now, an 18-month-old girl has had her hearing restored after she became the first person in the world to take part in a new gene therapy trial. Opal Sandy was born deaf due to auditory neuropathy, which disrupts nerve impulses from the inner ear to the brain. Now, thanks to a new treatment being trialled here, Opal's hearing is almost normal and could even improve further. Her parents say they are delighted. And police are appealing for helping to locate 2 people suspected of stealing culturally significant gold artefacts from a museum. CCTV footage shows 2 people in hooded tops climbing through a window at Ely Museum in Cambridgeshire in the early hours of Tuesday. Footage from a second camera shows 2 people rushing past, then returning seconds later, one of them apparently carrying a rucksack. Cambridgeshire Police said an item called the East Cambridgeshire Gold Talk was taken along with a gold bracelet. Anyone with information is being asked to contact police or Crime Stoppers. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 8 minutes past 2. Now, Labour's newest MP, former Conservative Natalie Elphicke, has now apologised for comments made about her ex-husband, the comments that were made after he was convicted of sexual assault and jailed in 2020.
Yes, she'd previously defended Charlie Elphicke, saying he was, in quotes, attractive and attracted to women and an easy target for dirty politics and false allegations. Now, in a statement released in the last hour, she condemned his actions towards women, including herself, adding it was right that he was prosecuted.
Did she write that statement herself, or was it squeezed out of her by the Labour press office? Let's get the view of one of her colleagues, one of her formerly more close colleagues, now a colleague across on the other side of the House of Commons benches, Conservative Member of Parliament for Lichfield, Sir Michael Fabricant. Sir Michael, this shocked a lot of people, but now Natalie Elphicke is getting a lot of heat from her own side.
Well, it's not surprising. I mean, she is the most extraordinary fit with the Labour Party. I mean, she is far more right-wing than most of the people in the ERG. I remember at Christmas time, she was saying to me about the boat people coming across the English Channel, that the Royal Navy should engage the French Navy and push these boats back into the middle of the English Channel. And if it meant attacking French naval warships as well, so be it. So,
Did you? Sorry, Michael Fabricant, the newest Labour MP, genuinely said to you she wanted to tackle French warships and potentially sink migrant boats.
It was extraordinary, and there are plenty of witnesses to the event. So, I just think, it was going to be difficult enough to keep her in the Conservative Party with views like that. I mean, she makes reform look like a bunch of Marxists.
Now, this is the line. So, now, Michael, we are hearing a lot about this, and of course, she's not here to defend herself from these comments. But you're allowed to speak, free speech, and all that. But
absolutely.
Michael,
and plenty of witnesses.
The Conservative MPs are trying to get this narrative that she's the most right-wing MP ever, that she was even more right-wing than the ERG, more right-wing than the New Conservatives, more right-wing than everyone, whatever, more right-wing than Nigel Farage. But that doesn't stop the fact.
Why?
That doesn't stop. That doesn't change the fact.
I haven't spoken to anybody. I've not colluded with anybody.
Yes, but it doesn't change the fact, Michael. It doesn't change the fact, Michael, that Rishi Sunak is losing MPs by the dozen.
Well, what's that got to do with Natalie? I do not know. But anyways.
Well, we've got Nadim Zahawi today. We've got Nadim Zahawi coming out today to say that he's not going to stand at the next election. That makes him the 64th Conservative MP to say that. OK, so that's 64 going. They don't want to stand again for his party. Yeah, and we've got Natalie Elphicke defecting to the Labour Party, even though she's apparently so right-wing. So what on earth's going on, Michael?
Emily, I know you're trying to make us... Nadim Zahawi was Chancellor of the Exchequer briefly. He was, I can't remember now, another ministerial position. He's decided, like so many people, you get to a certain age, if you don't like being a backbencher, you stand down and then you perhaps get a job in business.
What about the other 63, Michael? What about the other 63? What about the other 63?
Sorry, Emily, you keep interrupting.
Sorry, Michael, but what about the other 63?
Well, Let's go, you name them. This is going to be a boring interview, Emily, but if you want to go one by one through them, I'll happily talk to you about it.
We've got a graphic ready.
Well, as I can't see the graphic, because it's all very, very tiny, let's all go through it one by one, but it's going to be a very boring interview on GB News.
Well, we do only have a few minutes left, Michael. I did want to talk to you about what has gone on over the last few weeks or even months, because this is the first time we've had you on the show since the local elections. You were very busy in the local elections, campaigning all around the West Midlands. You were campaigning hard. You were quite involved in the Andy Street operation. What went wrong?
Well, what went wrong? It was very, very close. I think it's first of all worth noting that he only lost by a Labour majority of 0.25%. I thought it was going to be a picture of me for a minute, but it wasn't. 0.25%. And basically, as someone pointed out, actually all it needed was one Conservative extra vote in each ballot box, and he would have won. What went wrong? It's quite interesting. I think what went wrong was, first of all, there was quite a Labour surge in Coventry. Well, why in Coventry, I don't know, but in Coventry, there certainly wasn't in Birmingham. The Birmingham Labour vote dropped substantially. And we didn't see many switchers. There wasn't Conservatives voting Labour. What we did get was, for example, in Solihull, where we normally get a lot of Conservatives coming out to vote, they just didn't come out to vote. So that's partly went wrong. And I'll tell you something else as well. It was originally the plan that he would take over, as in London, as in Manchester, as in Yorkshire, with their Labour mayors. He would take over the policing side. That didn't happen for all sorts of complicated technical reasons within the Home Office, which I still haven't forgiven them for, but Andy Street has, I think. That didn't go ahead. It meant some of our literature had to be changed at the last minute. So there was that issue too. But yeah, it was very close. But what I found very, very moving, in the House of Commons yesterday, I've had Labour MPs hugging me, and Conservative. I've had Plaid Cymru saying the same. One Labour MP said to me, I've had more than one Labour MP saying to me, you know what, my parents live in the West Midlands and they voted for Andy, so he was very good. Which only goes to show you can be an absolutely brilliant person delivering, but when the tide moves, the tide moves.
Well, could Andy Street run for Nadeem Zahawi's seat, perhaps? You want to keep him in politics?
A very, very interesting question, that, yes. And in fact, I believe in Solihull, they would be happy. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but I understand.
That's Julian Knight's former seat, of course, who said he's standing down. Solihull, Julian Knight, the former Conservative MP, now independent, standing down.
Yeah, yeah. But I don't know if Andy would want to do that. You know, he's used to running things, used to run a business with 92,000 employees and a turnover of £13.5 billion. He was running the West Midlands, and by all accounts, very, very effectively too. And, you know, I've heard this from people who are not actually politically engaged, but, you know, are involved also in the running of various aspects of the West Midlands. He was very businesslike in the way he did that. I think, and I'm only guessing, I think he would like to run a large corporation, you know, I don't know, chairman of the BBC, director general of the BBC.
Oh, there you go.
Well, I suppose you have all of these politicians leaving their jobs in Westminster to go off and be mayors, whether it's places like the West Midlands or, I mean, London, of course. Sadiq Khan was formerly an MP. There are many examples of these big metro mayors.
A different skill set, though, Tom. It's a very different skill set, and you see it, actually. MPs are legislators. Now, I happen to have a business, but I'm not planning to be mayor, by the way, but, you know, I did have a business background before I came to be an MP. I was setting up radio and TV stations for a living all over the world. But most MPs don't have a business background, and suddenly, if they become mayors, you know, it's all about running something. It's not being a legislator. It's actually running something. And you really do need business people to get into that. And that's why Andy Street was such a good fit.
And in some ways, some of these big mayoralties, a bit more senior. It's an executive role rather than a legislative. You're not just one vote out of 650. You're the guy that makes the call, which I suppose is like, a more attractive prospect.
Yes, well, you know how I feel about all these mayoralties. Thank you so much, Sir Michael Fabricant. Great to chat to you. Hope you didn't mind me interrupting you too much. Conservative MP for Lichfield. Great to speak to him.
Yes, no, really interesting stat there. One more Conservative vote in each ballot box, and Andy Street would have won that mayoralty. Really interesting. Yeah. No, but don't go anywhere. We're going to be heading to one of those university encampments after this. Don't go anywhere.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Meghan's launched her new lifestyle range, starting with jams, and it's called American Riviera Orchard. Apparently, it's been made from organic fruits grown in Meghan and Harry's Montecito gardens. If we can believe it, I reserve an air of scepticism. But she sent out 50 jars of this jam to influencers and celebrity friends in the hope of trying to boost some sales to her products. But it's ended up winning for King Charles because fans have gone to Highgrove website and King Charles's jam has sold out.
So why did they go?
Has gone through the roof.
Why did they go to the Highgrove website?
Well, I think it's a bit of a blow against Meghan because they're saying we don't want your jam. We're going to go and get the king. So it just shows how popular the king is. This is what she's always wanted. Her dream has been to be like this Gwyneth Paltrow style lifestyle guru. She's always loved Gwyneth's website Goop. When she set up the TIG, which was her website when she was still in Suits as a working actress, that was the brand, the style of brand that she was going for, was this Gwyneth style, New York elite, very princessy. So this is her chance now by trying to cash in on her royal title because she is now a duchess, so she's using that to try and elevate her brand. And she's really now trying to carve out herself as this new Martha Stewart.
And she's coming out with the cooking show as well on Netflix. She's coming out with the cooking show. And she's, I mean, to be fair to Meghan, she has always tried to say that she's into healthy eating, organic food, cooking. But I don't see this being a success. It just will not happen for her because she's just burnt too many bridges. People just don't believe in her brand. They don't think she's authentic. So, are you an actress? Are you a guru? Are you a duchess? Are you a philanthropist? Who are you, Meghan?
Who actually are you? This is what we're asking. I don't think anyone knows. I don't think Meghan really knows who she is.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News with Dubes & Co from 6, followed by Farage at 7. At 8, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg addresses the state of the nation. And at 9, join Patrick Christie's Tonight, followed by Headliners at 11. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 20 minutes past 2. Now, at the top of the show at 12 o'clock, the Bank of England held interest rates. Let's speak to the man who was outside the Bank of England when it happened. What on earth does it mean for all of us? 5.25%. Liam Halligan is here for us now. Liam, it was expected, but it does have some implications.
It does have some implications, Tom. The Bank of England sets the base rate of interest, of course. It's at 5.25%. It's gone all the way up from ultra-low levels, 0.1% as we came out of the COVID pandemic. And, of course, interest rates have gone up very, very sharply in order to tackle inflation. But it turns out, Tom and Emily, inflation isn't yet low enough for the Bank of England to start lowering rates. The latest inflation number's 3.2%. That was annual price rises during the year to March. The Bank of England's target is, of course, 2%. So there's a way to go yet. So for now, the Bank of England continues to hold interest rates, even though we have had some countries around the world, the Swiss, the Swedes, they've actually started cutting. It seems to me as if the Monetary Policy Committee are waiting for the mighty Federal Reserve, the US central bank, to cut rates. And that may be 1 or 2 months yet.
Liam, there were 2 members of the Monetary Policy Committee who said that rates should be cut. Of course, they were outvoted this time, but they do show that there is a strain of thought there that said that this was the wrong move today.
There have been 1 or 2 members of the MPC saying that we should cut rates for quite a few months now. What's changed, Tom, is that some other members of the MPC have stopped saying that we should actually raise interest rates. So the committee's been split for a while. The committee was very much in lockstep during 2021 by insisting that inflation was transitory, inflation wouldn't balloon the way it did. Of course, we got all the way up to 11.1% inflation, big price increases, the height of the cost of living crisis back in the autumn of 2022. But the Bank of England's committee, they denied inflation was coming. They said if it was going to come, it would be transitory. It turns out that it wasn't. As interest rates start to move down, though, it seems as if the Bank Committee is split. I don't think we'll get to that magic number, 5 economists in favour of a cut at least, for another month or 2 yet. We've got the inflation number for April coming out in a couple of weeks' time. It will be lower than 3.2. It may even be approaching the 2% target. Having said that, as we've been saying on GB News for weeks and weeks and weeks, oil prices are ticking up. Petrol and diesel prices are ticking up. That will feed into inflation, and that will make it hard for some members of the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee to vote to cut rates, because if prices are going up, if inflation is actually going away from target, it doesn't make the Bank of England look very credible if it lowers rates anyway, and that's the problem.
No, yeah, we may not be out of the woods quite yet, but thank you very much, Liam Halligan. Great to speak to you, our economics and business editor there, with On the Money.
Well, just this week, property analysts said that we could see a house price boom in Britain again, despite stubbornly high interest rates. But what does that mean for people trying to get on the property ladder?
Well, Sally Mitchell, the mortgage mum and senior mortgage broker, joins us now. Sally, great to speak to you today. Interest rates held. They are still 5.25%. That makes mortgages. Yes, that makes mortgages extremely expensive for a lot of people. It makes it quite tricky for people to get on that property ladder. Those payments are very high indeed. What's your perspective?
Well, the idea of a property boom is something that just does not sound likely to me. I'm at the grassroots, I'm with clients all the time, and all I hear is, oh my goodness, how am I going to afford my new mortgage when I come to remortgage? And if I'm a first-time buyer trying to get on the ladder, where are the affordable houses and flats, and how on earth can I reach the property prices that I see advertised? I don't have enough deposit. I certainly don't earn enough to be able to pay, the increased cost of these higher rates every month.
It's interesting, though, the Express had a big story out just a couple of days ago saying tumbling inflation, likely cuts to interest rates and mortgage lending joy are set to boost house prices.
OK. I mean, great. Sometimes they just have to make a story. I don't know.
It's not what it feels to you on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, house prices we haven't had the crash that was widely reported or anticipated or, scaremongered. We haven't seen that. The 2 indexes or indices that we use, Nationwide and Halifax, they have shown a small increase overall, which is good news. The property market is fundamentally very resilient. It's a strong market for us. People are finding it harder to pay their mortgages. That's absolutely true. As for tumbling inflation, I mean, it's come down, but it seems to have taken quite a long time. All lenders in the last 2 weeks, mortgage lenders have increased their rates in anticipation of this lack of announcement today. I'm sure that the powers that be would love to see, especially the government, would love to see a reduction coming soon, preferably before November. But I don't think we're going to get one until, well, at least next month, maybe even September. And what we will see will be probably only 2 increases instead of the several that were forecast at the beginning of the year. And I think they'll only be 0.25% each. So it's going to be a long time before we see a real influence on the current rates.
Yes, it all seems to be happening rather slowly, doesn't it? Thank you so much, Sally Mitchell, mortgage mum and senior mortgage broker. Great to speak to you, get your perspective on all this.
Well, let's cross live to one of these campuses across the United Kingdom after Vice-Chancellors have been told to make sure they tackle anti-Semitic abuse. We have a very special reporter live for us. Patrick Christys is in Oxford. And Patrick, what on earth is going on behind you?
Yes, OK, so this is the Oxford Museum of National History, where you will be able to see an encampment behind me, quite a well-fortified encampment. Loads of signs here, welcome to the People's University for Palestine. There's also Jews for a Free Palestine over there. On the other side of it is a kind of rolling count of the amount of civilians that they are saying Israel has killed. It does appear to be mostly students here. There's a checkpoint to the left of me there, which is where everybody who is wanting to get access has to either sign a form to say that they support the Palestinian cause, which led to a lot of controversy yesterday when a Jewish student was reportedly turfed out of here. It comes off the back of Rishi Sunak trying to make sure that there is a clampdown on anti-Semitism on campus, but also as well that National Union of Students motion to expel the National Jewish Union of Students. So there's a heck of a lot going on here. They've got seminars taking place. There's a medical tent as well just at the back. There is the tooting of horns as you go past. I actually spoke to a professor around the Oxford area earlier on. He said that he was very concerned because a lot of the tooting of horns is, as he understands it, from members of staff at Oxford University who are actually on their way home or on their lunch break, so not just members of the public. So, yes, there is a sense here that perhaps the support is running right through academia. But I am going to try and get through this picket line, as it were. We've had a chat with some of the police officers who've told us reliably this is public land, so there's no way that they can legally stop me from getting in there. So I'm hoping to get a bit of that content for my show later this evening.
You mean to say that this little form that they're trying to stop people with saying, I support the Palestinian cause and whatever interpretation that might be, you mean to say you're going to deny them the right to force you to sign up to their values in order to enter public space? This is going to be electric.
Yeah, I mean, I think depressingly, even if I did sign that form, Tom, they probably still wouldn't let me in. There is a sign on the wall over there that says "Hands off Vietnam," which apparently has been here for decades, and Vietnam 1975, Palestine. So this actual site here does have form for supporting the Viet Cong. So read into that, of course, what you will. But yes, I'm just going to go and try and speak to a few of them. I'm really fascinated to know, I think one of the big questions about this is how many of them are actual students and how many of them are the kind of rent-a-mob activists. I will be honest with you, at the moment, it does seem, the general vibe is that it does generally seem to be from here, from what I can tell. But yeah, anyone who's not sympathetic to their cause. So yes.
Yes, very interesting what you say about academics tooting their horns and being involved in these protests. Does that make this all a bit more complicated for the universities to deal with? Thank you very much indeed, Patrick Christys. He'll be on again tonight at 9 o'clock and he'll have some conversations, maybe, with some of those student activists.
I was playing a fun game as Patrick was taking up the whole screen there, which was just looking behind him, counting how many people on the little raised grass bit were wearing COVID masks. I counted 5.
In this heat. I mean, I guess, presumably, it's quite a nice thing for you to do if you're a student activist, sit there on the lawn in the lovely weather.
How many of them would be there if it was torrential rain and freezing cold? How many would actually be sitting out there?
But anyway, coming up, don't go anywhere, because we'll be discussing whether Prince Harry has had a successful visit to the UK this week, despite the fact that his father, King Charles, did not make the time to meet him.
Emily, thank you very much and good afternoon. The top stories. The Bank of England's base interest rate is unchanged for a sixth time, held at 5.25%. Economists had expected the bank to hold its rates, with inflation remaining at 3.2%, which is above the 2% target. Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, says it's clear the economy has not turned a corner.
Bank of England's decision today is its independent right to make decisions about interest rates, but clearly that's bad news for people at home who are having to reset their mortgages for the years ahead at a more expensive rate, and for people having to pay rent for their homes. And that's why the economy has not turned a corner, and why people at home are not feeling any uptick when they're told by Conservative ministers doing victory laps this week that the country has turned a corner when it hasn't.
Labour's new MP Natalie Elphicke has apologised for comments she made about sexual assault. The MP for Dover announced her defection from the Tories to Labour just moments before Prime Minister's questions yesterday. But it's ignited a backlash among some Labour MPs after comments Ms Elphicke made in defence of her former partner, who was convicted of assaulting 2 women. Protesters are gathering in Malmo's Central Square in support of Palestine ahead of the second Eurovision semi-final. If you're watching on television, you can see live pictures of the historic Storteget Market Square. Hundreds of demonstrators are waving Palestinian flags in opposition to Israel's participation in the song contest. Crowds could be heard booing during Israel's performance last night by Eden Golan. Organisers were also forced to apologise after Sweden's Eric Saad wore a Palestinian scarf, a breach of the contest ban on political symbols. And businesses have been evacuated and 10 fire engines sent to the scene after a fire broke out in a Staffordshire parcel centre. Firefighters are tackling the blaze at Super Smart Services, a distribution warehouse. Plumes of black smoke were seen billowing out from the centre this morning, with some on social media claiming it could be seen from 10 miles away. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Not often we've been able to have a headline like this through the spring. It's been fine for a day or so in the south, but now most places joining in thanks to this area of high pressure. Not fine everywhere. There's always 1 or 2 exceptions. This weather front is bringing a little more cloud across the far northwest of Scotland through the Western Isles and some patchy rain here. A bit more cloud too over northeastern Scotland and northeast England, staying fairly grey in some places here. But for most, it's dry, fine, plenty of spring sunshine coming through, lifting those temperatures quite nicely. The coast's a little cooler, particularly where it's a little bit misty, but in the sunny spells, 22, maybe 23 degrees Celsius. That cloud thickening up across northern Scotland, Caithness, Sutherland, and then the Northern Isles, seeing a bit of rain through the evening and overnight. But for most, it'll stay dry. We'll see a bit more cloud and mist returning to parts of eastern England. Some fog patches possible across parts of southern England and South Wales as well. Temperatures in rural spots dipping to single figures, but most towns and cities staying in double digits. And most will have a cracking day tomorrow. Yes, could start a little misty, some fog patches, but they should clear fairly sharply. Some patchy rain across Shetland, but even that's on its way out by lunchtime. Some of the coasts, again, a little bit misty at times, particularly in the east, but most places dry, sunny spells and warmer still. Temperatures high teens, low to maybe mid-20s across the southeast.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. The A1 in Northumberland's currently closed between the North Charlton turnoff and the Alnwick North Junction. Long delays building is at the scene there of a collision. But there's a breakdown on the southbound M6 causing delays. A lane closure is also in place to assist. That's Knutsford at 19 down to Middlewich and Holmes Chapel Junction 18 southbound. Southbound M5 still queuing for around about 10-15 minutes from Thornbury 14 towards the M4 15, though the earlier collisions cleared. All the lanes I can see on the cameras are back open. Westbound M4 in Berkshire, Wokingham at 10 to Reading at 11, slow for an earlier issue, but again all lanes open. And still queuing clockwise for the M25. Just before the M4 15, there was a breakdown that's cleared, all lanes open, although still slow back to Staines at 13. That's your latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Right, it's 2:37. Up next, Prince Harry back on UK soil this week. Has it been a successful trip? And we're going to be getting to some of your views. Lots of you have been writing in about everything. But before that, it is Martin Dalby, who's at 3 p.m. He joins us now. Martin, tell us all what's coming up.
Well, a shocking report called Taking Back Control published yesterday by Emmerich, and the former Housing Minister Neil O'Brien has proved that 89% of England's housing shortage has directly been driven by uncontrolled immigration. And furthermore, only 15% of non-EU nationals arriving in the UK are actually working, came here to work in the past 5 years. Astonishing figures. This cannot carry on. There's a 30-point plan on how to rectify that. Plus, of course, Natalie Elphicke, the scandal rolls on, now forced to apologise by Labour MPs who clearly don't even want her in the Labour Party. And finally, protest within tents. Your man Patrick Christie is, of course, at Oxford University. We hope he's got a nice little water cannon under his arm. All of that coming up on the show.
I did suggest in our morning meeting that he bring in a super soaker with him, but I don't know. It might be quite nice. It's such a lovely day outside. Everyone probably wants to have a bit of water.
Hopefully he doesn't get into any trouble. I mean, it probably won't be like the protest down in Peckham that he was at, which did get a little bit rowdy and a little bit violent, actually.
No, I mean, these protesters clearly have never eaten a bar of protein in their life. I don't think that they're going to be able to land a hand on him at all. I think he's probably fine.
So we're all safe. We're all safe. Martin, it sounds like a fantastic show, really highlighting some of those key stats from that report. Lots to get stuck into. Thank you, Martin. Yeah. See you at 3.
No, I'm genuinely really looking forward to seeing how far Patrick gets past. Because I can just imagine people sort of running after him saying, "You've got to sign the form." And he'll just go, "No, I don't. No, I don't."
Keep rolling. Keep rolling. Do we have time to do some views now? Yes, we do. Well, sorry, go on.
Firstly, I really wanted to get to Paul's comment. Paul has written in saying, "Why keep views coming in if you never interact with them?" Well, there you go, Paul. That's your interaction.
Oh, very clever. Very clever. I'm sure Paul will be delighted. We were talking about the countryside because this couple of newlyweds said it's boring, xenophobic, and that their dog was getting depressed living there, so they moved back to London. Daniel says, "Good afternoon, Tom and Emily. The countryside is the most magical place. You've inspired me to go for a walk down Bournemouth Beach in the sunshine. Thank you. Thumbs up." He says, well, remember, you can stick us in your ears, too, with the old radio.
Certainly. Well, Lee has been commenting on those Oxford protests. He says, "What's with all the COVID masks?" I agree entirely.
We've been asking about that. Is it an identity thing? Is it that they're still stuck in pandemic times? Are there lots of germs going around at this particular encampment? Anyway,
more than Freshers' Week.
Brenda says, all people in those protests on campus should have to prove their student ID, otherwise they should be kicked off site. That would sort the renter mob out. Yes, it's one thing to have students protesting at their own college, at their own university, on their own campus. But when you start having agitators joining in, which I'm not saying is happening in Oxbridge, Patrick will find out, but these things can escalate because lots of people who are just renter activists come along, don't they?
Well, Stuart says, "I thought that the police had the power to ask protesters to remove face coverings. Did it come into force in February this year?" And yes, it is the case that on a protest march, the police can ask people to stop covering their faces. Interesting that that's not going on here. It doesn't look like they'd resist particularly hard. Again, I mean, I've seen some pretty burly-looking protesters out in the United States. These people don't look like they'd hurt a fly.
Well, to be fair, I don't believe that they're doing anything illegal. that would warrant police intervention at this stage.
Smoking cannabis, maybe?
Maybe.
I'm not saying that they are, but
I
they
don't
might.
know if it's against the law to be on that grass, perhaps against the university rules anyway. But yes, keep your views coming in. And Lexi says I was absolutely right about that soul-crushing iPad advert, so thank you for that. Thank you for that. Yes, it was.
Well,
this was the advert that Hugh Grant said was a crime against humanity or something like that.
And you agree with Hugh Grant?
I do,
Oh, there
for
you
once.
go.
So there you go.
It's a match made in heaven. But speaking of crushing of the soul, Prince Harry has visited the UK this week to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Invictus Games.
That's a nice thing. That's a nice thing. But yesterday, the Duke of Sussex, who was not accompanied by his wife or children, visited St Paul's Cathedral for a service of thanksgiving with his mother Diana's relatives.
Just a few miles away, his father, King Charles, welcomed guests at the first Buckingham Palace garden party of the year. His full programme prevented a reunion with his son, so he said. I don't know why Prince Harry couldn't pop along to the Buckingham Palace garden party, go from St Paul's to Buckingham Palace, not a million miles away, but clearly there was no time.
Yes, Prince Harry's spokesperson did say that it was because King Charles was just far too busy for him. So Prince Harry appears to have successfully celebrated the anniversary of the Invictus Games, but he failed to meet both his father and, of course, his brother too. So has it been a success?
Well, let's speak with the royal biographer Angela Levin, because Angela, I'm reticent to say it, but the king could have made time, couldn't he?
I really hate it when I hear people saying that. You know, he has just been allowed to go out. He's still having a lot of care because he has cancer. And you don't do that to a king. You don't say to him, well, actually, Harry has done this. He's actually tried to make his visit impossible. He's done it 2 or 3 times by giving no time before he comes over, not saying when he's going to be there. He also keeps on saying he wants apologies before they have a proper conversation. And he often bullies his father for money still. Now, I think that if you are that ill and you're 75 and you've got to go to an outdoor party where there are 8,000 guests and you've got to shake hands and be very polite and say nice things, you don't want something negative to block you. And some people asked him how he was feeling, and he says, not too bad. Well, for me, that's being very subtle about not too good either. And he has to look after himself. And I think if Harry had said, when can I come? When does it suit you? When are you free? And I can come over and spend a little while with you and let's try and really work through this. He doesn't. When I was with him for 15 months in 2017 to write his biography, he was lovely. He was very flexible. But since he's got married, he is not flexible. He's demanding and he gets angry and he won't give in. He won't sort of agree to compromise. And so it's going
Angela,
to be...
that's a very good point you make there. Prince Harry was coming to the UK anyway for this Invictus Games event. He didn't bring his children with him, didn't bring his wife. He clearly wasn't intending to necessarily use this trip as a get-together, as an olive branch to his father. But yet he gets his spokesperson to say, oh, it's the King's diary that's far too full. Does seem a little bit twisting the narrative perhaps there a little.
Absolutely. As you said, Tom, he could have made an effort. I don't think it would be a good idea to go to the garden party because the king has to go round to everybody else. He can't stop for having a conversation with Harry. But it would have actually said, well, if I see you just for a few minutes afterwards, I know you're being very tired, but let me pop round. I think he's demanding. He doesn't give in. He won't compromise. And it's really, really sad. And I think that to criticise Charles when he's doing his best is really unnecessary. I think with Harry that he also wanted to get to be seen with his father, so that when he and Meghan go to Africa, to Nigeria, then he can sort of imply that the royal family in London, in the UK, actually agree with what he's doing and are supporting him. And I think that they had to be very careful about that, because they're not representing the UK, they're not representing anything. And you can say, who are you representing? They're going away for a holiday, really. The sort of holiday they would like, with lots of attention and free meals and a nice place to stay. I think it's all about that. I mean, Meghan said she's got 43% in her genes of being Nigerian. So, let her enjoy that, find out what their lives are like. And if she and Harry would like to go and live there, we'll be fine.
Right. Well, Angela, we've run to the end. I'm afraid we've got to get to a break, but thank you so much for joining us and talking through that issue. It's lovely to see such a sunny Buckingham Palace. Sometimes those garden parties, the weather is not brilliant, but clearly it was a great day to hold it this time.
Yes, don't go anywhere, because coming up we're going to be discussing how Britain is refusing to sign a global vaccine treaty that would force it, potentially, to give away a fifth of our jabs come another pandemic. That's after this short break.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Between 1955 and 1989, an average of 55 nuclear tests were conducted across the globe each year. More than 30,000 young British and Commonwealth servicemen served at British test locations in Australia and the Pacific Ocean. But in the years since, those who were involved say they've been ignored and lied to about their exposure to radiation. For decades, Lab Rats International has represented the millions across the world exposed to fallout from the testing programmes and the families who still suffer today from illness and deformities. Last year, the government unveiled the Nuclear Test Medal, recognising the military, civilian and overseas staff and personnel who participated in Britain's nuclear testing programme in the 1950s. But for Lab Rats founder Alan Owen, whose own father was a nuclear test veteran, the work is only just beginning. In September, they launched a legal challenge to the Ministry of Defence to provide the test veterans full medical records, which they say they've been denied access to.
We sit in this bubble as the nuclear test veteran community, fighting against the establishment. And they will say, ministers will go in Parliament and say, all you've got to do is apply for your medical records and they'll give them to you. It just doesn't happen. It's not a reality. They're not there as easy, as accessible as just applying. They will fight you all the way. They will delay it.
In response, a government spokesperson said, "We are grateful to all service personnel who participated in the British nuclear testing programme, which is why we have formally recognised them with an official medal. Nuclear test veterans who believe they have suffered ill health due to service have the existing and long-standing right to apply for no-fault compensation under the War Pensions Scheme." The fight for these veterans and their families lives on, because thousands who came before never got the recognition and justice for their service.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News with Dubes & Co from 6, followed by Farage at 7. At 8, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg addresses the state of the nation. And at 9, join Patrick Christie's Tonight, followed by Headliners at 11. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Well, it's 2:50 in the afternoon, and the Telegraph is reporting today that Britain is refusing to sign the World Health Organisation's pandemic treaty if it continues to insist that the UK would have to give away a fifth of its jabs come another pandemic.
Well, the UK is said to be against such a commitment and won't agree to any form of pandemic agreement that undermines our sovereignty.
Yes, representatives of the organisation's 194 member states are said to be halfway through talks to agree on this agreement, which was first announced in May 2021, so it rumbles on.
Well, we can get the view of the head of lifestyle economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Christopher Snowdon, now. I remember the vaccine battles. When Ireland said it might close the Irish border, when the EU was trying to stop exports of vaccines that we had bought first. I mean, are we just doing a bit of vaccine nationalism here?
No, I don't think so. I think it's. I think the government is absolutely right to say no to the WHO. I think the government should say no to it more often. I mean, I don't think it's a good idea to agree to just, without knowing what's going to happen in the next pandemic, to just say, oh, we're going to give away a fifth of our vaccines. What happens if we're the first country to develop the vaccine again? We've got to give away a fifth of them, and people in this country don't get them. I mean, even if you agree with the principle, and the WHO is always going on about equity and this kind of thing, I wouldn't trust the WHO to do it. I don't think the WHO should be given any more legally binding powers. It's a completely corrupt and incompetent organisation. If anything, we should be cutting down what we give to it. We pay vastly more than other countries on a per capita basis. It's totally unaccountable. No, I wouldn't trust it to run a bath.
Well, this is the thing, Christopher. You've documented the WHO's failures. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about why you say the organisation is corrupt and something that perhaps we should consider leaving altogether.
Well, where do you begin? I mean, just look at its primary job of controlling infectious diseases. It dropped the ball massively on COVID. It was far too close to China. It ignored and belittled Taiwan's response. It got basic facts about the virus wrong. It said there wasn't human-to-human transmission long after it was obvious that there was. It said it wasn't an airborne virus long after it is obvious that it was. And in previous pandemics, or at least epidemics, Zika, Ebola, and so on, it has been found wanting. It's a useless organisation that's obsessed with lots of things to do with, sugar taxes and things like this, and spreading misinformation about vaping rather than getting on with the job of dealing with infectious diseases. I think that we need actually to have a replacement for the WHO in the long term and pull out of it. I think it's absolutely broken beyond repair. Tedros should have resigned years ago due to his numerous mistakes with...
And yet, Christopher, there were... I mean, it wasn't entirely incorrect about everything about COVID. I mean, at the early stages, it was saying that masks are bad and it's not an airborne virus. By about year 2, it sort of had cottoned on to some of the right ways to deal with an airborne virus.
Well, there's still quite a lot of disagreement over whether masks helped at all.
Yeah, well, I mean, by year 2, I think everybody worked it out. We didn't really need leadership from the WHO. The point of the WHO, or one of the main points about it, is it's supposed to be tackling these things very early on. And, there is certainly room for international cooperation when it comes to identifying these things and monitoring these things. I just don't think the WHO is very good at it. It was bad with COVID. In fact, it was actively misled by China on COVID, and it was pretty poor with these other more minor viruses. I think the international medical and scientific community can do a lot better without the WHO.
Well, so you'd say the UK should just pull out of this treaty altogether and not follow with all these negotiations? I mean, it's been going on since 2021. Should we just pull out?
Well, let's see what it says. If it's pretty bland stuff, then we can go along with it. But if there's legally binding declarations, such as we have to give away a fifth of our
Chris, I'm so sorry we've run to the end of the show. We'd love to talk to you for longer, but that's all we've got time for. Thank you very much for joining us. That's it from us today. Don't go anywhere, though. Martin Daubney is up next. See you then.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Tomorrow, well, more of the same pretty much for most places. A fine, Fairly warm spring day. It's not been glorious everywhere today. There's been quite a bit of cloud around across parts of the north and some outbreaks of rain just trickling across northern Scotland. That'll continue through the night across northern parts of the mainland up towards the Northern Isles. For most, though, it's going to be a dry night with clear spells. A bit of mist and low cloud returning to parts of eastern England and in southern England, South Wales. Maybe 1 or 2 fog patches around. Temperatures could dip down as low as 4 or 3 degrees in some rural spots. Most towns and cities, though, staying in double digits. And a fine day to come on Friday. Any morning fog in the south will clear pretty quickly. Some mistiness around some coasts, perhaps parts of Norfolk and Suffolk. Some damp weather early on across Shetland, but that should scoot away. Small chance of an afternoon shower over northern England and southern Scotland, but the vast majority dry, fine and warmer than today. 21, 22, maybe 23, 24 in a few places. Fine day to come on Saturday as well. Perhaps again some of this mist and low cloud just threatening to make it quite murky on some eastern coasts, but for most dry, fine and sunny. Maybe again 1 or 2 isolated, but perhaps heavy showers over northern England and southern Scotland. But generally more spring sunshine to come and warmer still. 23, 24, maybe 25 on Saturday in those sunny spells. Bye for now.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The next Great British Giveaway winner could be you, with a massive £20,000 in tax-free cash to be won. Imagine how you'd react getting that winning call from us.
Hi, my name's Phil Cox and I won the Great British Giveaway. I'd say why not? What is it? The price of a text and £2 to enter. And if I can win it, anybody can win it. And they're going to get even more money this time round, so why wouldn't you go in the draw?
For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that